हमारे साथ फेसबुक पे जुड़े सभी साथी इस वेबिनार में जो भी सम्मिलित होने वाले हैं, तो आप सब क्वेश्चन पूछ सकते हैं, अपना कमेंट कर सकते हैं। और हमारे साथ आज प्रोफेसर पूनम बत्रा सेंट्रल इंस्टीट्यूट ऑफ एजुकेशन से हैं, डॉक्टर विकास गुप्ता हिस्ट्री डिपार्टमेंट दिल्ली यूनिवर्सिटी से, ऑल्सो ऑर्गेनाइजिंग सेक्रेटरी ऑफ ऑल इंडिया फोरम टू राइट टू एजुकेशन। प्रोफेसर अशोक अग्रवाल है हमारे साथ, सीनियर लॉयर इन सुप्रीम कोर्ट। प्रोफेसर मधु प्रसाद एंड Miss Nisha Dedwal from SPM College. She also pursuing PhD from Central Institute of Education, Delhi University. So, जैसे आप जानते होंगे कि नेशनल एजुकेशन
सुमित, मैं प्रोफेसर नहीं हूँ, करेक्शन कर दो एक छोटा सा।
एडवोकेट अशोक अग्रवाल,
ऑर्डिनरी एडवोकेट हूँ मैं।
या सो नेशनल एजुकेशन पॉलिसी को लेके देश भर में विरोध प्रदर्शन और सजेशंस भेजे गए थे जब ये पहले आया था। तो उसके बावजूद भी हमको ये सिर्फ कवरिंग करने वाला लगा कि पहले वाला जो ड्राफ्ट था सेम उसी तरीके का ड्राफ्ट, केवल शब्दों का हेर फेर इधर उधर करके सिर्फ नुक्ता हटा के उस तरीके को प्रस्तुत कर दिया गया है, जो कि देश संविधान के एजेंडे की बजाय जो रूलिंग पार्टी का जो एजेंडा है उसको प्रोत्साहित करता है। तो इस तरीके का हमें लगता है, तो इन चीजों को लेकर आज हमने वेबिनार का आयोजन किया है। तो हमारे जो 5 स्पीकर हैं, तो हम सबसे पहले प्रोफेसर पूनम बत्रा से स्टार्ट करेंगे। सो शी विल स्पीक ऑन देयर टॉपिक। So, Professor Poonam Batra, we are inviting you to speak on the topic. Ma'am, just on your
yes, now.
Mic.
Yes, now we can hear you.
Sorry, yes. Thank you very much, Sumit and the organizers for inviting me today. How much time do I have? Can you tell me quickly?
Each speaker should speak in between 10-15 minutes. After that, there will be some questions. We will take some questions from Facebook.
Right. All right. So 10-15 minutes to talk of NEP 2020, maybe a bit short, but I think since we are many of us speaking, so we'll try and flag issues and not duplicate what others will speak. So let me start by saying that the NEP 2020 is probably the 4th draft of this policy ever since 2016, when something was put up and we were all alarmed that it didn't even talk of RTE. But here we are, 2020, and there is no mention of RTE. Now, I would like to begin by saying that there are 2 levels at which we see this policy. The first, that it is disconnected from ground realities. So, for example, there are a large number of teacher vacancies, there are a large number of unqualified teachers, lots of problems in terms of provisioning. Now, those are the ground realities that this policy doesn't even talk about, or does not even, I mean, normally one would expect a policy to identify the gaps and to sort of work on them and also to build on what there is. But there's another level at which the policy seems to be actually quite connected. And what is it connected with? It has a continuity with what the neoliberal policy agenda has been so far. And it's not something that started with the NDA in 2014, but something that had been following since the economic liberalization of the mid-1990s. So what are the 4-5 things which this policy focuses on? One, and which very many people have got actually quite impressed by. One is the fact that it talks of early childhood education and foundational literacy and numeracy. Second is the rearrangement of curriculum and pedagogic structures from 10+2 into 5+3+3+4. The third is a new teacher education model and a new architecture for higher education. Of course, lastly, a governance structure. So it seems to give an impression with the kind of vocabulary it uses that it is a very forward-looking policy. And I see some of the best minds in this country falling trap to that. And I think we need to understand how it is being projected and then critique it from that viewpoint. My understanding and my analysis of the policy tells me clearly that this is a policy that is going to exacerbate inequities that we already suffer from. Not only inequities in terms of society, but the educational inequities that we have perpetuated over the years, and I will explain how. So not only is the right to education sort of absent in the discourse and policy, it is only merely flagged as something that happened in the past to take us towards legal underpinnings and a near enrollment, universal enrollment. But in terms of its future plans, the policy has no mention. It is silent completely on the RTE. And my understanding is that this silence is deliberate because the RTE is something that this government has failed to deliver on, because there have been huge cases of school mergers. There's been 3 major amendments in the RTE. So the policy 2020, in a sense, is pulling down the curtain on RTE, literally taking us to believe that this is an initiative of the past. And yet it says that we are committed to providing equitable quality public education from the foundational stage to 18 years, which is high school. Now, what are the mechanisms? What are the structural processes and structural functions which will be put in place? If you don't talk of RTE, what do you have in mind? Obviously, there is nothing in mind. But the defenders of the policy are saying that this is not an implementation plan, that this is only a vision. But a vision cannot be complete without a clear indication of some kind of a structural provisioning. And the details of the plan can, of course, come later. But what we find instead is actually stated in the policy in terms of taking the neoliberal agenda forward by rationalizing small schools and now giving legitimacy through policy to the practice of school mergers, which has been happening. In 2018 itself, we found 40,000 schools that were merged in Madhya Pradesh and Chhattisgarh and Jharkhand and Orissa. So in a sense, it is a failure of the government. And therefore, what the policy is trying to do is to basically confound the fact that the RTE is not extended. How is it confounding the fact? By telling us that we are committed to foundational stage to 18 years. So it gives us an impression that RTE is extended, but actually it is not. The policy is stating, without mentioning RTE, that we will make the requirements for schools less restrictive so that alternative models can come in, and that we will have all kinds of philanthropic organizations coming in. It uses terms like encouraging and facilitating philanthropic organizations, another substitute for what we have been saying private. So very clearly, the policy is moving towards that trajectory. And the problem with it is very clear when you read the section on what they call socio-economically disadvantaged groups. Now, everybody under the sun who they think is disadvantaged falls in this policy, which is SC, ST, OBC, minorities, what they call disabilities, girls, the poor. I mean, it's amazing. So if we actually look at this population, it would account for about 80% of India's population. So aren't we then, through policy, saying that there is a different kind of education for these 80% and there's a different kind of education for the 20%? Now, I'll tell you why I am analyzing it in this way. The fact that this policy is proposing a segregated system of school education, because very clearly it talks about multiple pathways of learning, including formal and informal methods, peer tutoring, voluntary-led community initiatives to support learning of children. And all this is being talked of in the context of SEDGs. So it's very clear that we are looking at it in a very segregated manner. And this segregated school system is being backed by what the policy is talking about in terms of teachers and teacher education. At one level, it is talking about a 4-year integrated program for all teachers, which in itself is problematic, pedagogically unsound, because it's talking about a common single model for a diverse country like ours. It actually defies the social, cultural, linguistic diversity of our country. It also defies the pedagogical curriculum principles of different levels of school education. Now, interestingly, why is it doing that? It seems that the neoliberal reforms that were already underway had undermined the teachers' epistemic identities and their epistemic capacities and the need to have epistemic knowledges. it seems to have already essentialized teacher knowledges. And therefore, the NCF-NCFTE, which came out in 2005 and 2009, tried to revive some of these ideas. But soon after, we had a change of political dispensation. And now in the 2020 policy, there is talk about a new national curriculum framework, both for school education and for teacher education. So to my mind, this marginalization of the teacher and teacher knowledge, and essentialization of teacher knowledge, and a weak problematization of school knowledge, all of this had already happened, and the NCF-NCFT could not resurrect it enough, so that now we are back to square one, and therefore the policy is saying that the 4-year integrated model will be a single model within which knowledge itself is not central. The central aspect of this policy is skills and competencies and values. And values, of course, are a string in which there is something mention of constitutional values, but largely values that talk about a common homogenized identities of our country. And I think this is one of the key problems of the policy, because even with regard to teacher education, it is basically saying that within the SEDGs, we will develop special education groups, and we will ensure that there will be 1-year adapted B.Ed programs or even shorter certification programs for teachers from within the same community, which means, again, you're thinking of a segregated way of looking at the education of children through teacher training in the SEDGs, and a segregated way of looking at it for the non-SEDGs. So the Policy 2020 is clearly laying down the foundation for an inequitous school system and an inequitous teacher education system. And I would go as far as use the word a segregated school and teacher education system, which is closer in its ideology and vision to an apartheid rather than to an equitable way of looking at education. Even with regard to in-service, we already have seen a lot of in-service of teacher training being pushed into the outsourcing space. All kinds of business organizations like the Boston Consultancy Group or the Central Square Foundation or Dell Foundation have been doing these kind of in-service trainings. So just the last 4 points quickly to sum up. One, that NEP does not address structural problems such as teacher shortage, weak professional capacity, and a lack of a lot that needs to be put in place. It legitimizes, regularizes all shades of private schools, including the ideologically driven, such as the Ekal Vidyalayas, which are one-teacher schools, and they are expanding everywhere. And the policy, by removing restrictions of the RTE norms, is giving way to these kind of schools to come back, or the low-fee paying private schools. Now, interestingly, during the pandemic, it has been observed that many of these low-fee paying private schools have been closing down. In Punjab, you see an increase in enrollment in the government schools because of this reason, because people are losing their livelihood. They cannot even afford to pay what is called 500 rupees and less fee. And they're saying 50% of the schools actually demand that kind of fee. Even that people are unable to pay. Now, what are we saying through policy? Are we saying that we want to proliferate the low-fee paying private schools? Because Central Square Foundation, as an advocate of privatization, is telling the government in its report that please treat them as MSMEs. Please look at the low-fee paying private schools that need support from government and give government financial support to them. What a strange thing. Shouldn't our government be supporting its own schools rather than merging them in the name of rationalization and being economically unviable or suboptimal? And what that would mean is that दूर दराज के इलाकों में जहां बहुत सारे आदिवासी बच्चे, दलित बच्चे, कई तरह के marginalized sections रहते हैं, उनके लिए schools बंद हो जाएंगे. They will be pushed into the private sector, which they will not be able to afford. So what are we saying? The policy is clearly moving towards a segregated and inequitous system. Secondly, the policy is shifting. It's the duty of the state to provide equitable and public education to actually becoming a regulator of a privately dominated education system. It is through its various proposals putting the onus of learning on children and holding a community accountable to actually support learning of children. It is underinvesting, and it is inaction. In its inaction, it is putting all the teacher education, which is now 95% in the private sector, it is basically not doing anything about it and allowing it to grow even further. It is disempowering the teacher and making the teacher into a worker. Why? Because it is saying that we will recruit teachers not just in schools, but in school complexes. And teachers will be then within a school complex of a radius of 5 to 10 kilometers be expected to run from one school to another school to actually take classes. I mean, this is absurd because the same logic of distance is being used to rationalize small schools and to do school mergers. It is subjecting school and teacher education to a common governance framework through a rejuvenated and remodeled CABE, which itself means that it is shifting the fulcrum of power from state-level bureaucracy to state and center political executive, which is dominated by the government of India. So in my mind, the wedge that was created between the constitutional aims, which were towards equitable quality education, and the market-led reforms that we had, now this wedge is not only sharper, but it is achieving validity and legitimacy through the NEP 2020. So in one sense, the NEP 2020 enabling critical and legitimate openings for privatization that is not committed to the Constitution. It is also making entry points, structural openings to an ideological agenda, not through the schools that are run, ideologically driven schools, but it is saying, if you look into the document, that unutilized school buildings, especially during non-school hours, will be used to run Samajik Chetana Kendras. Who are these Samajik Chetana Kendras? We just have to do a little bit of search on the net, and we know that they are a network of social consciousness which is being run by Vidya Bharati schools, because the policy clearly says that we do not only want to impart education, but we want to impart values and social consciousness. So in that sense, I think by putting the sort of structural openings for privatization, for ideological capture of curriculum and pedagogic spaces, and towards a very highly centralized control system of governance, it is doing this all in the veneer of choice and inclusivity. And that is a mere smokescreen. And I think we need to call out this policy clearly, because there are very few of us who are able to see its subtext and its real agenda. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Meena. So we have Professor Dr. Vikas Gupta, and he will speak on higher education and problems in NEP regarding the higher education. So we are inviting to Professor Vikas Gupta to speak on the topic.
Thank you, Sumit. I hope I'm audible. Yes?
Yes, sir.
Okay. So thank you, Professor Batra, for a very, very precise and very, I must say, exciting presentation. I just want to build one point from there and then come to higher education. 2 points are there. One is that really thinking that it has actually provided full support to these budget primary schools, because this is how I read this whole proposal for the pairing of government and private schools. In fact, so teachers will not be only serving within the school complexes, the other government schools, but also wherever it is required, they'll have to also go and teach in the budget primary schools. Anyhow, the second thing is that, I mean, even this policy, the way it shows the figures of the secondary education in our country, that in itself is a challenge for higher education already, and it's going to aggravate this manifold, because the figures of secondary education as are given in this policy itself show that even in terms of the national average, only 16% is the enrollment at this level. and there are gross inequalities of social inequalities at this level, to the extent that the participation of the SC children is only 10% out of the 12% or like that, and then ST children 10%, and in fact in the case of children with disabilities, it's just 1%, and that 1% is reduced by this level to 0.5%. So you can understand how weak is the entry point already. And this policy for higher education, and if this policy is implemented, how this is going to complicate this whole picture. This reminds me again the preface of the Birla-Ambani report, where it categorically stated that we need to see education, in terms of its social relevance. So if this policy, I should not say implemented, because it is already under implementation without even taking to the parliament. And the agenda, the schedule of its implementation even includes the restructuring of the degree programs from next academic years. So which means that the 4-year degree program, originally abolished by the NDA 2, is going to be reintroduced by NDA 3. So this is the first thing that I want to alert to. And the MPhil is being scratched. The implementation has already begun, as I said. I have been told, and I'm to admit I need to cross-check it, that the Ambedkar University of Delhi has, I think, already abolished MPhil after this. Now, this means, particularly for social sciences, a huge loss. Sciences and maybe many streams in commerce were increasingly going to direct PhD mode. But in social sciences, we were still in better, more renowned universities, we were still following the MPhil model, because we noticed that we don't have that lab culture where there is a supervisor and the peer group. So after the master's, the student goes to work in a particular area where the exact topic is already almost set by the overall work ethics of the lab. In the social sciences, the picture is, the requirement is very, very different. So the way one of the ways in which this particular policy is going to seriously and negatively impact on research in higher education in social sciences is evident in the abolition of MPhil. And I think it suits fairly well with their market-oriented agenda, with their all-pervasive tendency to suppress critical thinking and dissent. That is why the master's program is being reduced to 1 year. Even though the policy says that there will be 2 options, but the overall thrust of the policy is in favor of 4-year graduation and 1 year post-graduation, and no MPhil, direct PhD. This direct PhD is again in line with the needs of the market. You go and serve at any point of your studies. You can discontinue with this illusion that you can come back. So multiple exit points. And with this illusion that, okay, so whenever you come back, you can even pursue a PhD. And it is going to be an illusion, because as soon as you enter the domain of work, you also gradually move into taking on other responsibilities of the family. And think of our girl students, how additionally difficult it is going to be for them to continue higher education. If they drop out at any particular level with a diploma or a certificate, forced to merit or forced to work and then enter the family life, how additionally it is going to be difficult for them. And this policy does not, I would not say does not mention, rather deletes the term secularism and socialism. The term secularism was present in the previous drafts. Why is it that this is deleted from here? And this is going to again impact on higher education very significantly, because now one of the four verticals of the, that in itself is a whole topic of discussion. One of the four verticals of the National Commission for Higher Education, the General Council for Higher Education, will prepare model curriculum. In fact, they call it model, but we know, those who are in the departments, how that model curriculum of UGC in itself is a restrictive framework for the academic autonomy of university. But now this is going to be all the more difficult, because this will be imposed. It will also have, the policy has already said that this will have the not only the value education on its agenda, it will formulate some agenda of value education from pre-primary to higher education. So for higher education, this is going to be the responsibility of the General Council for Education, and a set of values. Now see the contradiction. Not just the problem that, what they are going to promote, a set of skills, identified skills. What kind of skills are they going to promote? Those that the market will tell them. Not just this, but see the contradiction. This policy has this rhetorical claim of full development of the child and the youth. So at one end, the policy claims rhetorically to ensure full development, and on the other hand, it gives the mandate to the General Council to prepare a set of values and a set of identified skills to be taught by all universities. It is again only a myth to say that they are going to kind of do away with the complexity that are present in the management of higher education today by creating one centralized body called National Commission for Higher Education. Because ultimately, the kind of schema of work division that it gives amongst its four verticals, and remember, these are not the only four verticals. There are other bodies that will still remain in functional despite the fact that this policy will come, medical council and other things. So the work division which is proposed is so complicated that actually it will not improve, rather make things more complicated. Still, just to gain a political control and roughshod over the idea of the institutional autonomy of the educational autonomy or academic autonomy of the educational institutions, it proposes a central body. Right? Because when the University Act came, or even when the UGC Act came in 1956, the idea was that the universities must have their academic autonomy. There's another way in which this is going to cut this academic autonomy. It only talks of the boards of governors, in fact, independent boards of governors. Right? It does not talk of or repeat the procedure of the academic council, the executive council, the student body's role in curriculum making, in decision making pertaining to teaching learning. So this syllabus, this curriculum is going to be just imposed. You have the board of governors going to approve. There may be some tokenistic consultations. And now, since I'm speaking to students, I want to also alert in a couple of minutes before I close that this policy uses the term for variety of things strict on the grounds on strictly on merit basis, whether admission, whether recruitment, whether scholarship. Remember, the term is not merit, the term is strictly merit. It does not talk of reservation. Right? It does not talk of reservation either in terms of students' admissions or or the recruitment of teachers, nor it promises the scholarship on the grounds of deprivation. Right? So at best, some of you may get scholarship on grounds of merit, or if you come to specifically disadvantaged category, then also. The whole idea that people who all get some scholarship, non-net scholarship for MPhil, PhD, is different from the kind of formulation that you get. Students will recall the whole struggle, which is now known as the UGC Occupy struggle. That was for ensuring the continuity of this scholarship. Instead of this, the NEP 2020 proposes that all existing scholarships, whatever kind of scholarship that are available today, will be merged in a single scheme to be provided from a single window. It also says, and it's a very, very historically alarming thing, that by 2035, all single disciplinary or small higher educational institutions will be replaced by bigger multidisciplinary institutions, because they will be more viable for the market to maintain. There are two things which we need to remember here before I stop about this particular point. One, it means that the whole range of colleges, the entire networks, either created by, for example, people like Gandhi or Ambedkar, Bhaurao Patel and many others, or afterwards by their followers. If this policy is implemented, those institutions will have to be closed down. As Professor Batta has already hinted, I mean, it has a different schema for even the teacher education. Right? On the other hand, this will be replaced by a corporate model being promoted in the name of philanthropy, where fees will be deregulated. The institutions will have to only make it transparent and subject to some audit procedures. But what is the criteria? You have to take only that. You have to only, if you are honest, if you are honestly disclosing the receipts, right, of any amount from students, whatever that amount may be, the only criteria is that, okay, it may be linked to your NAC score. But again, that is not mandatory. Remember, it takes away the older idea that you have to fund the institution first and then expect result. It is based on the idea of output measurement and accreditation, which means that the institutions which are already lagging behind, their funding will be reduced, fine, and they will be closed down or given in the name of philanthropy to private sector. And the institutions which already have a lot of elite clientele and therefore facilities, not only that their funding will improve, but they will be allowed to move out of the university system as part of the graded autonomy system. And therefore what will happen? The universities will, in the first instance, will be left with poorly maintained colleges, and then subsequently dismantled to create a system of community-based colleges. Actually, that community term in itself is a disillusion. These will be the corporate maintained colleges. So this is the overall design of higher education model that they are proposing. The last thing ultimately I want to say is that it is in this model that now they are also formally, as part of this policy, trying to legitimize the entry of the foreign universities, again with a very rhetorical agenda. And this is what we see in our national televisions today, that whole debate. What is the rhetorical agenda? Bharat is a Vishwa Guru. So if you are a Vishwa Guru, why do we need to invite foreign universities? Because you had, again, a very unhistorical claim. The universities in ancient India, which taught thousands of students. Any history teacher or student will understand how difficult it is to maintain such a claim. But on those cultural nationalist arguments, it invites foreign universities within this kind of a market of education. So what will happen is that education will not only be a business, but it will create even a worse situation than what you see either in terms of the recent pandemic, the ongoing pandemic, or the long-drawn crisis of the agriculture sector. People are committing suicide. That kind of a system is being further promoted and very, drastically through this new education policy, which is still being portrayed as a policy, even though it is not a policy at all. It is being portrayed as if now this has been enacted. Even the cover page of this draft nowhere mentions that it's a draft approved by the cabinet. It appears to be similar to previous policy approved by the parliament. So it is that kind of a situation that we have to deal with. That is where I think I should stop. Thanks a lot for giving this opportunity.
Thank you so much, sir. So now we have Advocate Ashok Agarwal. He's a senior lawyer in Supreme Court, and he also seeing the things of education. He's active in the school education. So we inviting Ashok Agarwal ji to speak on NEP and the government schools.
धन्यवाद स्टूडेंट फेडरेशन ऑफ इंडिया का धन्यवाद खासकर कि इसको ऑर्गेनाइज किया और मुझको मौका दिया। देखिए, जहाँ तक ये नेशनल पॉलिसी की बात है 2020 की एजुकेशन पॉलिसी की, ये प्राइमरीली जो है वो एजुकेशनिस्ट का सब्जेक्ट है और मैं एजुकेशनिस्ट हूँ नहीं, लेकिन फिर भी राइट टू एजुकेशन पे काम करने की वजह से एज ए लॉयर मैं इसके ऊपर कुछ टिप्पणी करूँगा। पहले तो यह है कि ये जो मैंने इसको रीड किया है, ये मोर और लेस जो है जगलरी ऑफ वर्ड्स है, नंबर एक। नंबर टू ये है कि जो हालात देश के खराब हैं शिक्षा के क्षेत्र में, उसको ये एक तरीके से अफर्म करता है, अफर्म ही नहीं करता, उसके हालात को और बिगाड़ने की जो है ना दिशा को वो दर्शाता है। और एक क्लास डिवाइड के ऊपर है, जैसे पूनम मैडम कह रही थी कि 80% लोगों को घटिया एजुकेशन और 20% एजुकेशन लोगों को अच्छी एजुकेशन। तो ये एक तरीके से क्लास डिवाइड पूरा अपेरेंटली जो है ना दिख रहा है और टिल्टिंग टूवर्ड्स प्राइवेटाइजेशन जो है उसकी तरफ वो जाने की बात कर रहा है। और कहीं वो सीरियसनेस नजर नहीं आ रही कि रियली कोई बहुत बड़ा एजुकेशन रिफॉर्म्स जो है आप ला रहे हैं और सारे देश की जनता की जो बच्चे हैं उनके लिए कुछ अच्छा आप करने को जा रहे हैं, ऐसा कुछ कहीं लग नहीं रहा है। और इसलिए ये एक तरीके से एक मोदी जी का जैसे जुमला होता है ना, ये उस जुमले से ज्यादा मुझे नजर नहीं आता है। इसमें जो मैं कुछ सजेशंस करना चाहता हूँ, सबसे पहले जो बहुत ही मतलब ना मुझे लगता है कि बहुत इंपॉर्टेंट है स्कूल एजुकेशन के अंदर रेडिकल रिफॉर्म्स लाने के लिए। जैसे एक पहला मुद्दा है कि जितने भी हिंदुस्तान के स्कूल हैं उनको जो है ना आप केंद्रीय विद्यालय के पैटर्न पर ऑर्गेनाइज करिए और उनको वो स्टैंडर्ड दीजिए। और इसके साथ क्या करिए कि जो मल्टी लेयर्ड जो पब्लिक फंडेड स्कूल्स हैं, डिफरेंट लेवल्स के और डिफरेंट एक्सपेंडिचर्स जिसके ऊपर होता है, डिफरेंट सेट ऑफ सोशो इकोनॉमिक ग्रुप्स को वो एड्रेस करता है स्कूल्स, उन सबको मुझे लगता है कि वो जो डिफरेंस है बीच में, डिस्क्रिमिनेशन जो है उसको एबॉलिश करना चाहिए और सारे इक्वल स्कूल्स जो है ना देश के अंदर बनाने चाहिए। ये पहला मेरा एक सजेशन है। दूसरा ये कि जो क्वालिटी मिड डे मील है वो सिर्फ 8वीं क्लास तक के बच्चों को नहीं, वो 12वीं क्लास तक के बच्चों को, सबको बच्चों को देना चाहिए। क्योंकि हमने एक चीज बड़ा अजीबोगरीब देखा कि एक ही बच्चा जो स्कूल में पहली क्लास से पढ़ रहा है 8वीं क्लास तक तो उसको मिड डे मील मिलता है और 8वीं के बाद जब 9th में आता है तो उसका मिड डे मील बंद हो जाता है। तो मुझे काफी अटपटा लगा और मैंने बच्चों से भी बात करी तो उनको लगा कि नहीं सर, हमें कंटिन्यू रखना चाहिए इसको। तो ये एक दूसरा एक सजेशन है। तीसरा मेरा सजेशन है ये कि जो प्राइवेट स्कूल्स हैं, आजकल तो बहुत बड़ा, हमेशा ही प्राइवेट स्कूल मुद्दा बना है और जब प्राइवेट डिस्कस होता है तो फिर कहीं कहीं गवर्नमेंट स्कूल डिस्कस होता है, अदरवाइज तो गवर्नमेंट स्कूल कहीं नजर ही नहीं आता है। तो प्राइवेट स्कूल में जो एक तरीके से मनमानी ढंग से जो फीस की वसूली होती है और ये बढ़ती जा रही है, तो हमारा सजेशन ये है कि एक नेशनल लॉ लाना चाहिए फी को रेगुलेट करने के लिए, क्योंकि हम सब जानते हैं कि कानूनी एंगल से जो कमर्शलाइजेशन ऑफ एजुकेशन है या प्रॉफिटरिंग है वो जो है लीगली प्रोहिबिटेड है। तो अगर ये एलिमेंट्स हम निकाल दें फीस में से तो मुझे नहीं लगता कि वो फीस जो है वो मतलब किसी तरीके से मतलब ऐसी होगी जो नहीं दे सकते हम, है। लेकिन क्वेश्चन ये है कि एक स्कूल जो फीस लेता है वो इतनी फीस ले लेता है कि अगले साल जो है एक और स्कूल वो बना लेता है। तो आज की तारीख में जो एवरेज फीस एक प्राइवेट स्कूल लेता है वो कम से कम 50% जो है वो अनजस्टिफाइड लेता है। सुप्रीम कोर्ट ने अपने 2007 के फैसले में भी कहा है कि फीस जो है वो जस्टिफाइड होनी चाहिए और ट्रांसपेरेंसी होनी चाहिए और इन स्कूलों की अकाउंटेबिलिटी होनी चाहिए। तो ये तीनों चीजें कहीं हमें तो दूर दूर तक नजर नहीं आती। तो हमारा एक सजेशन ये है कि एक नेशनल लॉ लाना चाहिए, क्योंकि ये पूरे देश में यही प्रॉब्लम है मोर और लेस, और सब जगह पेरेंट्स जो है एजिटेट कर रहे हैं। तो आप एक नेशनल लाइए और उसके अंदर ये देखिए कि वो एलिमेंट्स जो कमर्शलाइजेशन और प्रॉफिटरी की है वो उसमें माइनस करके वो फीस ले सकते हैं, ऐसा प्रोविजन होना चाहिए। और हमारा उसके अंदर एक और इंपॉर्टेंट चीज क्या है कि वो जो लॉ बनेगा उसके अंदर कम से कम 50% जो है रिप्रेजेंटेशन पेरेंट्स को देना चाहिए जो स्कूल की मैनेजिंग कमेटी में है। क्योंकि ये कोई मैं और आप तो स्कूल खोल नहीं सकते, तो ये सारे स्कूल वो हैं जो सोसाइटी है सोसाइटी का मतलब फिलैंथ्रोपिक है, कोई प्रॉफिट मतलब कर नहीं सकते लॉ के अंदर। तो जब प्रॉफिट आप कर नहीं सकते, चैरिटेबल इंस्टीट्यूशंस हैं, तो आपको क्या ऑब्जेक्शन है अगर पेरेंट्स का 50% रिप्रेजेंटेशन जो है वो मैनेजिंग कमेटी के अंदर हो। एक और जो इसी लॉ में होना चाहिए वो ये होना चाहिए कि इनके सारे अकाउंट्स, क्योंकि ये पब्लिक फंडेड है, पब्लिक पैसा देती है इनको, तो ये सारे जो है जो कंट्रोलर ऑडिटर जनरल है जो है वो इन सबके अकाउंट्स को ऑडिट करे। एक ये लॉ के अंदर आना चाहिए। और एक जो और है कि अभी पेंडेमिक है, पेंडेमिक में बहुत बड़ी प्रॉब्लम आ रही है, लोगों को पता है, हमें नौकरियां चली गई हैं, नए नौकरियां मिल नहीं रही हैं, धंधे बंद हो गए हैं, बहुत ज्यादा हालत इकोनॉमिकली जो है वो लोगों की हालत खराब हो गई है, फीस नहीं दे पा रहे हैं। तो हमारा मतलब एक सजेशन ये है कि सेंट्रल गवर्नमेंट एक ऑर्डिनेंस लाए जो रियल तरीका है इनको चेक करने का, और उसमें ये कहे कि कोई भी प्राइवेट स्कूल जो है वो जो ट्यूशन फी है उससे ज्यादा नहीं लेगा, कोई भी चीज नहीं लेगा, और जब तक ये स्कूल बंद है। और ट्यूशन फी वो होगी जो 99 के अंदर जस्टिस दुग्गल कमेटी ने उसके कंपोनेंट्स को बताया था, क्योंकि कई स्कूल ऐसे हैं जिन्होंने सारी फीस को मर्ज कर दिया है और अब वो कह रहे हैं कि ये तो ट्यूशन फी है, तो वो लोगों को मिसलीड ना कर सके, इसलिए ये जो ट्यूशन फी की डेफिनेशन है वो भी लॉ के अंदर क्लियरली डिफाइंड हो। अगर सेंट्रल गवर्नमेंट ऐसा करती है तो मैं समझता हूं कि बहुत बड़ा रिलीफ जो है वो पेरेंट्स को मिल सकता है। एक हमारा कहना यह भी है कि राइट टू एजुकेशन एक्ट जो है वो अभी 8वीं क्लास या 14 साल तक की है। उसकी वजह से क्या है कि पिछले साल कई 100 बच्चे जो 9th में आए आरटीई में जिनके एडमिशन्स हुए उनको स्कूल वालों ने निकाल दिया, और इस साल कई हजारों बच्चे जो है 9th में आए हैं 8वीं से जिनको स्कूल वालों ने निकाल दिया, और अभी अगले साल ऐसा है कि कई लाख बच्चे हो जाएंगे जिनको जो है स्कूल निकाल देगा। तो हमारा कहना यह है कि राइट टू एजुकेशन को एक्सटेंड करो आप 12th क्लास के अंदर, और इसके लिए अमेंडमेंट लाओ राइट टू एजुकेशन में, जिससे कि ये जो बच्चे पढ़ रहे हैं वो 12वीं तक पढ़े, जो स्कूल 12वीं तक है वो 12वीं तक पढ़े, जो 10वीं तक स्कूल है वो 10वीं तक पढ़े। तो और इंटरेस्टिंग ये है कि हमने जब पब्लिक इंटरेस्ट लिटिगेशन हाईकोर्ट में डाला तो सेंट्रल गवर्नमेंट ने अपने एफिडेविट में कहा है कि हम इस तरफ काम कर रहे हैं, और उन्होंने पॉलिसी का भी जिक्र किया कि पॉलिसी के अंदर इस इशू को लिया जा रहा है, और पॉलिसी फाइनलाइज करने के बाद हम इसके अंदर पार्लियामेंट से अमेंडमेंट लाएंगे। और कोर्ट ने भी उनको कहा है कि ये रियली एक जेन्युइन प्रॉब्लम है बच्चों की, जिसको सेंट्रल गवर्नमेंट को कंसीडर करना चाहिए। तो इसके लिए भी एक लॉ लाने की जरूरत है। एक ये है कि जो एक और बड़ा इंटरेस्टिंग है कि जो प्राइवेट स्कूल्स होते हैं ये एक तरफ गवर्नमेंट को लूटते हैं, दूसरी तरफ पेरेंट्स को लूटते हैं, तीसरी तरफ जो टीचर्स और जो दूसरे स्टाफ होते हैं उनको लूटते हैं। और जैसे दिल्ली एक एक्सेप्शनल है जहां सिक्योरिटी ऑफ सर्विस टू सम एक्सटेंट है और पे कमीशन भी सिक्योर्ड है, और किसी को अगर एग्रीव्ड होता है तो वो ट्रिब्यूनल में जा सकता है। लेकिन हिंदुस्तान के बाकी हिस्सों के अंदर इस तरीके की कुछ भी चीज नहीं है, ना पे कमीशन है उनके लिए, ना सिक्योरिटी ऑफ सर्विसेज है। तो हमारा ये भी कहना है क्योंकि जो एक एजुकेशन, एक अच्छी एजुकेशन के लिए आप टीचर्स को जो है ना वो एक इंडिस्पेंसेबल वो है क्लास है, उसको अलग नहीं कर सकते, उसकी सुविधा भी आपको देखने की जरूरत है, वो हमारे बच्चों को पढ़ाता है। तो हमारा ये भी कहना है कि सेंट्रल गवर्नमेंट एक ऐसा कानून बनाए जिसमें सारे एम्प्लॉइज जो भी प्राइवेट स्कूल्स में होते हैं उनको सिक्योरिटी ऑफ सर्विसेज दे, और ये भी इंश्योर करे कि जो पे कमीशन की सैलरी होती है जो गवर्नमेंट एम्प्लॉइज को मिलती है, गवर्नमेंट स्कूल में मिलती है, वो उनको मिले। तो ये भी एक लॉ जो है वो चाहिए। दूसरा ये कि जो पब्लिक फंडेड स्कूल्स हैं, जितने भी पब्लिक फंडेड स्कूल्स जो है वो टोटली फ्री एजुकेशन दे। अभी आज हम देख रहे थे कि कानपुर की एक न्यूज आई है, कानपुर में, कि बहुत सारे बच्चे जो यूपी बोर्ड के जो फीस होती है 9th की, 10th की, 11th की, 12th की, जो एग्जामिनेशन फीस होती है वो दे नहीं सके, तो उनका रजिस्ट्रेशन ही नहीं हुआ। तो हमारा ये भी कहना है कि जो ये जो बोर्ड एग्जामिनेशन बोर्ड का जो एक्सपेंस है वो भी टोटली जीरो होना चाहिए। स्कूल एजुकेशन ऑल रिस्पेक्ट ऑल एंगल से बच्चों को जो है वो फ्री मिलनी चाहिए, ये बहुत इंपॉर्टेंट है। और क्या कहें, अभी हमारा ये भी कहना है कि जब तक ये पेंडेमिक चल रहा है स्कूल बंद रहे और एकेडमिक ईयर जो है जीरो डिक्लेयर किया जाए और सारे बच्चों को प्रमोट किया जाए, सारे बच्चों को प्रमोट किया जाए। और एक बहुत इंपॉर्टेंट चीज है, लास्ट जो है सजेशन, वो ये कि जो गवर्नमेंट स्कूल्स हैं हमारे उनमें लगभग 50% से भी ज्यादा आज की तारीख में जो है सैंक्शन पोस्ट टीचर्स की खाली पड़ी हुई हैं। तो वो जो टीचर्स की पोस्टें हैं वो भरी जाए प्रॉपरली और क्वालिफाइड टीचर्स को रखा जाए और उनको पूरा सैलरी दिया जाए। हम गवर्नमेंट को मानते हैं कि ये मॉडल एम्प्लॉयर है, मुझे तो आजकल लगता है कि सबसे ज्यादा फ्रॉड एम्प्लॉयर है ये गवर्नमेंट है। अपने ही एम्प्लॉइज को जो है कहीं कैजुअल बता के, ढॉक बता के, कहीं गेस्ट टीचर बचा के, कहीं उसको मैत्री टीचर बता के उसको किस तरीके से एक्सप्लॉइट कर रहा है। एक तरफ तो उनको एक्सप्लॉइट कर रहा है, दूसरी तरफ जो अनक्वालिफाइड लोगों को रखकर जो है हमारे बच्चों को पढ़ा रहा है वो खुद में एक तरीके से बहुत ही खतरनाक है। तो ये कुछ सजेशंस हैं जो मुझे लगता है कि गवर्नमेंट को समझना चाहिए अगर वो रेडिकल रिफॉर्म्स लाना चाहती है। लेकिन ये जो पॉलिसी है अगर इसको हम रीड करते हैं तो हम ये देखेंगे कि ये जो सजेशंस हैं ये कहीं भी उधर उधर नजर नहीं आते हैं। अगर एक दो चीजें मैं आपको हाईलाइट करूं इसकी, जो मैं समझ पाया हूं राइटली और रॉन्गली, वो ये कहता है कि जो मासिस के बच्चे हैं वो सब आंगनवाड़ी में 3 से 6 साल के जो बच्चे हैं वो सब आंगनवाड़ी में जाएंगे। अब हम सब लोग जानते हैं कि आंगनवाड़ी का क्या स्ट्रक्चर है, क्या आंगनवाड़ी एजुकेशन दे सकती है। दूसरी तरफ जो प्राइवेट स्कूल्स हैं जो प्री प्राइमरी एजुकेशन देते हैं वो उसका मेन स्कूल का हिस्सा है। फॉर्चुनेटली दिल्ली के अंदर दिल्ली गवर्नमेंट ने फैसला लिया कि जो प्री प्राइमरी होंगी वो मेन स्कूल के साथ अटैच होगी, बट ये सारे देश में तो नहीं है। और ये पॉलिसी जब कह रहा है कि आंगनवाड़ी, तो हो सकता है आने वाले वक्त के अंदर उनको दिल्ली में भी डिटैच कर दिया जाए। तो एक तरीके से जो मासिस के बच्चे हैं या तो स्कूल के बाहर रहेंगे या वो सब स्टैंडर्ड एजुकेशन लेंगे। तो ये एक तरीके से डिस्क्रिमिनेटरी टाइप ऑफ जो है पॉलिसी है। दूसरी तरफ ये लैंग्वेज की भी बात करता है कि जो मासिस के बच्चे हैं उनको जो है आप रीजनल लैंग्वेज जो मदर टंग है उसमें पढ़ाएंगे। आज के वक्त में अंग्रेजी जो एक तरीके से रूल करती है हिंदी के ऊपर, क्या आप उसको इग्नोर कर सकते हैं? एक प्राइवेट स्कूल में जो बच्चा पढ़ता है शुरू से एक इंग्लिश मीडियम के अंदर, वही हाईकोर्ट के जजेस, मतलब हम कभी हिंदी में बोलने लगते हैं तो कहते हैं व्हाट इज द लैंग्वेज ऑफ द कोर्ट का लैंग्वेज इंग्लिश में है, आप इंग्लिश में बोलिए। सारा सिस्टम देश का इंग्लिश में चलता है। आप जो है क्योंकि मासिस के बच्चे हैं इसलिए आप उनको जो है ना उस मेन स्ट्रीम सिस्टम से अलग रखना चाहते हैं। तो ये भी एक रिफ्लेक्शन है इसका। या तो सबके लिए कर दीजिए, सारे देश के लिए कर दिए, मदर टंग को कोई अपोज नहीं कर सकता, सारी हिंदुस्तान के बच्चों के लिए कर दीजिए, प्राइवेट के लिए। लेकिन उसमें तो सुप्रीम कोर्ट ने कह दिया कि प्राइवेट स्कूल में जो मीडियम ऑफ इंग्लिश है उसको आप टच नहीं कर सकते, गवर्नमेंट के पास कोई पावर नहीं है उसको छेड़ने की। अभी एक और एस्पेक्ट बड़ा इंटरेस्टिंग है लास्टली, जो वो ये है कि ये पॉलिसी ये बोलती है कि 2.3 जो है या 3.2 करोड़ बच्चे जो है वो आउट ऑफ स्कूल हैं, जो क्लास 6 से 18 मतलब 12वीं तक के बच्चे, वो करीब इतने हैं। वो ये कह रही है, खुद कह रही है 3 करोड़ 22 लाख बच्चे हैं। अब आप और क्या कह रही है कि 10 साल के अंदर हम 100% जो है वो उसकी एनरोलमेंट करेंगे। क्या बच्चे वेट करेंगे? और क्या ये सिर्फ 3.22 है? अभी डॉक्टर प्रोफेसर विकास कह रहे थे कि जो डिसेबल्ड बच्चे हैं वो 1% से भी लेस 0.5% जो है वो हायर एजुकेशन में आ रहे हैं, जो मैं समझ पाया है। इसी तरीके से जो गवर्नमेंट जो स्कूल्स हैं हमारे देश के, आज देश के अंदर 2 करोड़ से भी ज्यादा बच्चे, स्कूल एज बच्चे डिसेबिलिटी के कैटेगरी में आते हैं, उससे भी ज्यादा। और स्कूल में कितने हैं? 1% से भी लेस है। तो अकेले जो डिसेबल्ड बच्चे हैं वही 2 करोड़ है। जो माइग्रेंट लेबर है 7 करोड़ माइग्रेंट लेबर है, उनका भी 1-2 करोड़ बच्चा है। ड्रॉप आउट्स कितने हैं? गवर्नमेंट स्कूल में 5वीं के बाद खुद ये पॉलिसी कह रही है कि ड्रॉप आउट हो रहे हैं। तो आप इनको कहाँ एड्रेस कर रहे हैं? आप कह रहे हैं उनको प्रायोरिटी में लाएंगे, प्रायोरिटी लाएंगे कहां पे जब आप पूनम बत्रा मैडम बोल रही हैं कि इतने 40,000 स्कूल जो है वो बंद हो गए हैं। तो जब स्कूल्स बंद हो गए हैं, एनरोलमेंट आपका कम हो रहा है, टीचर्स अपॉइंटमेंट आप नहीं कर रहे हैं, बेसिक फैसिलिटी आप नहीं दे रहे हैं, डेलिबरेटली डिजाइन सिस्टम डेवलप कर रहे हैं जिससे कि गवर्नमेंट स्कूल्स जो है वो बैठ जाए, बंद हो जाए, और उससे प्राइवेटाइजेशन जो है, प्राइवेट स्कूल्स जो है वो प्रमोट हो, तो ये बेसिकली जो है ये एंटी पीपल है, एंटी चिल्ड्रन है, एंटी नेशन है, एंटी कॉन्स्टिट्यूशन है। कॉन्स्टिट्यूशन सबको इक्वलिटी का राइट देता है, क्वालिटी एजुकेशन का बात करता है, तो ये कहाँ है? तो मैं समझता हूं कि इगैलिटेरियन सोसाइटी की बात करता है। क्या इस पॉलिसी को लागू करके आप इगैलिटेरियन सोसाइटी लेंगे, या एक क्लास डिवाइड क्रिएट करेंगे जिसमें कुछ परसेंट जो बच्चे हैं, जो रिच के बच्चे हैं, वो तो एजुकेशन लेंगे, वो भी पता नहीं कौन सी अच्छी एजुकेशन लेते हैं या नहीं लेते, लेकिन वो फिर भी एक एजुकेशन सिस्टम में रहेंगे और बाकी सारे एजुकेशन डिप्राइव्ड होंगे। तो मैं ये समझता हूं कि ये पॉलिसी जो है वो कोई भला करने वाली नहीं है, और एज ए लॉयर मैं समझता हूं कि पॉलिसी जो है वो कोई ऐसा लीगल डॉक्यूमेंट नहीं है जो एनफोर्सेबल एट लॉ है। तो हमें एक्चुअली में, अगर सरकार सीरियसली ईमानदार है और सचमुच देश के बच्चों का भला करना चाहती है, तो हमें लीगल वे में, लीगल एक्ट के अंदर जो है हमें अधिकार दे बच्चों को कि वो एक अच्छी एजुकेशन ले सकें। थैंक यू वेरी मच फॉर गिविंग मी एन अपॉर्चुनिटी।
Thank you so much, sir. Now we have Professor Madhu Prasad. So we're inviting Professor Madhu Prasad to speak on the topic.
Thank you, Sumit. I have been asked to speak on online learning and the digital divide. But I think there is a lot more to be said right away from what the people who have spoken before me have spoken. It's very clear that this so-called education policy is not a policy at all. What the government has decided to do, and that is evident on every page and every suggestion that they have made, what the government has decided to do is to withdraw itself from the area of education and allow the market to take over. If you look at the way in which they have done their governance structures, the governance structures today have nothing to do with education or with academic considerations or involvement. You have people who will manage the financial and the management aspects of institutions, and they are the ones who will run it. Investors will come, investors will either be happy with the situation that they find and invest in a particular institution, or else they will go to another institution and check it out whether that is a better one to invest in. That is why you have single window regulators, rather than having a structure in which the academic, the standards, everything is handled by people who have the ability to take on those jobs. But this is, so what I feel this policy, if I can call it that, has to do is really to say that, look, we are withdrawing from education. Now you see how the market can enter into this. And I think a very important thing happened on the 1st of May this year. You know, it was very surprising because on the 1st of May, as you all know, is Labor Day. And the working class is involved in a series of demands which they raise before the government. The government looks at the problems of working and so on. In a situation where after the pandemic and the sudden 4-hour lockdown, which was imposed all over the country without so much as a buy or leave, where you had millions of migrant labor walking because there was no public transport. The whole country had been shut down for 3 weeks. You had migrant labor walking with their children, with their families, with their little portlies which they were carrying. They had to walk all over to try and get back to their villages to survive, because there was no work for them in the cities, and there was no place for them to stay and no ability for them without salaries. How could they stay and pay whatever rent they were paying where they were staying? Now, either you can say that the government didn't realize how much migrant labor was there. in the country. Or you can say the government had no option. You see, the medical situation, the health situation was so difficult. We keep hearing from the government, you have to choose between health and between livelihood. So first we chose health, we finished your livelihood, and now when you can't survive, we are telling you, now forget about health and now go on to livelihood. In other words, the government is really not taking responsibility for its decisions. The government is saying one thing. When the people's livelihood and their life circumstances collapse, the government starts to say, okay, now don't do this, now do that. So this is a government which I believe is truly and deeply unconcerned about the people of this country, particularly about the people of this country who are the least resilient and have the least wherewithal with which to override these shock treatments which the government keeps imposing on them. And I find the same thing is happening in education. On the 1st of May, the Prime Minister addressed the country. He did not speak about the workers. What did he say? The most important job before us is to reform the education system. Suddenly he begins, when schools have been closed since early March, suddenly on the 1st of May, the Prime Minister realizes that he wants to reform the education system. And they say that what we are concerned about most of all is that we want to have a uniform pattern of quality in the education system, and we are going to reform the education system in order to impose this uniform quality. 2 days after that, the finance minister says that what we are going to do is that we are going to use extensively, we are going to use technology in the promotion of education and in facilitating access of all people into education. So first, we have uniformity of quality. Second, we have an extensive use of technology in order to develop this uniformity of quality. And finally, we are told that digital education is going to be our basic reform pattern. Right now, they said, if 20% of your educational curriculum is handled digitally, now we are going to ensure that 40% of your curriculum is going to be handled digitally. And we are going to ensure that what you do is online courses, MOOCs, all these things will be involved. And right away, 100 universities are going to be allowed to introduce the online distance education courses. 100 universities by the end of May. That is within 20-30 days. But there is another point where we understand what this government is doing. The education secretary said in an interview to one of the newspapers that what we are going to do is we are going to immediately implement those aspects of our policy which do not require any expenditure. We are going to immediately implement those. And the first thing in that is, which is going to be done is, and we had Sundar Pichai coming and meeting the Prime Minister, the head of the CEO of Google, and we were told that this there's an $18 billion market in online education. By 2024, this is going to be an $18 billion market, and the huge corporations, multinational corporations who are dealing with this whole technological structure, they are just coming in and they are going to be handed over your education system. You are going to have online courses, online learning, online training of teachers, online, everything is going to be online, for which the government does not have to provide any facility or infrastructure. The companies will come and give the hardware. The students, the individual family, the individual student will have to pay for this education, will have to pay for these online courses. And you are going to have, the government will be sitting pretty, the corporates will be patting the government on the back by saying, very good, you have moved out of education and we have moved in. Thank you for giving us this huge market. And now we will begin to decide what is to be taught, how it is to be taught, and how long it is to be taught, and how much it's going to cost for it to be taught. You see, if we look at, there's a change not just in the market value, there's not a change just in the market value of the areas where the government is pushing people onto these online courses. What is happening now is that you are going to be provided with a system which is going to tell you that you will study in this way. When you want to marketize and to online education, then what you have to do is education has to be dished out in little parcels, so to speak, in modular units. And these modular units will, each one of these modular units will train you in a competency. You have to become competent in performing this particular task. That is Unit 1, Unit 2, Unit 3, Unit 4. And you will now be provided these units. They will be uniform. Their quality will be the same. Whether we can call it academic quality or not is not a problem which bothers the government. But everyone will be doing the same thing. There will be a homogenization, a uniformity, which will be imposed in the teaching learning process itself. You will have these units, modular units, which will determine how the teacher teaches, how the student studies, how the assessment is to be done, how the grading is to be given, and then finally, how this grading can be utilized. I want you to look at one very major thing that has happened in this policy. This is the numerous exit entry points that this policy has put online. The first point of exit, I call it actually an exit strategy, because there is very little entry that I see space for in this. The first exit point is in class 3. Before that, all you have achieved from age 3 to age 7, all you have achieved before that is literacy and numeracy. This is what earlier we used to call literacy mission ka kaam. Literacy and numeracy is all that the children will learn until class 3. At class 3, they will have to sit for an exam which is likely to be a centralized all India exam. Likely to be there, because there has been attack on this, and because CBSE has said we can't handle this exam. What is happening is that they are trying to withdraw it and say, okay, we'll see how it can be done, whether it can be done in school or whether it can be done by a central board. But given the general tendency which they're adopting, it will be a centralized exam. So after class 3, you will have a centralized exam, you can exit. After class 5, you will have a centralized exam, you can exit again. After 8, you will have 8th class, you will have a centralized exam, you can exit again. Then you do 9 and 10. Then you have another exam, so you can exit again. Then you have 11 and 12, and you can exit at any point. 9, 10, 11, you can exit if you want. But once you have performed 12, once you have finished the 12th class exam, you will not be able to go directly into higher education. You will have to sit for another exam. And that exam depending on how you're graded there, will give you the opportunity to go further in higher education. But we don't have to worry too much, because 85% of our population of Bahujans, 85% of them, SC, ST, marginalized minorities, linguistic and regional minorities, people with disabilities, girls in all these categories, only 6% of them even make it to higher education. So having ensured that even the 6% will now have difficulty, because the 12th class exam now doesn't matter. They have said we are going to make 10th and 12th very easy. They're making it so easy that it doesn't help you to get anywhere. Where will you be dropping out when you go out? There is, on the one hand, there is talk of vocationalization. But even this vocationalization is something they have not dealt with very well in the past. They have had these skill training schools, and the Prime Minister had some scheme of skill training. That also led to nobody, hardly 0.05% of people in the last 5 years of this skill schools have been able to get jobs. So what is going to happen is, at class 3, at age 8 or 9, that is under 10, you are first going to start pushing children out into family-based enterprises, if not directly into child labor. You are going to push them out there, and this is only going to strengthen, because if they go to family enterprises, it's likely to be caste-based occupations. So you will strengthen the caste basis of India's society. Now, in this process, if suppose somebody wishes to re-enter, then you have to show, re-enter education, then you have to show what are the skills that you had acquired when you left, when you exited from education. And therefore, you can only enter at that level, and that level is going to be earmarked right up to your end of your your 4-year your 4-year undergraduate course. That whole level, your skills are going to be pointed out, and you will be able to go out and enter into somewhat. Will you enter into a college with a skill level grade? No, you will not. That skill level will only equip you to enter into some digital course, some open learning, some distance education. So you find that 85 to 90% of the children of your country will either be denied education completely, or else denied education completely, meaning in the sense, I presume they will give them literacy skills, literacy and numeracy, which, by the way, the East India Company in 1813 had suggested that India's children should be given numeracy and literacy, and that is the education which they require and they should receive, because they should be able to understand our permanent settlement of our permanent settlement law. They should be able to tell us how much is the what is numeracy was required to tell them how much land you own. Literacy was required to be able to read the law. So something that was done in 1813, suggested in 1813 and carried out in 1813, we are now being told is a great modern new idea on the one hand, and on the other hand, we are being told that it is based on our ancient culture. Well, it's not that ancient, although I think 1813 goes back pretty far. But what we have to realize is that for the vast majority of India's children, you are going to get a uniformity of education. But that uniformity of education is not going to be in a school, is not going to be in a college, is not going to be in a university. It is going to be an open learning course which you are going to have access to. You will now, the children of the poor and the dispossessed, People will now be taking loans so that their children can study online, so that their children can study in open learning. Because everyone knows that if you don't have that wretched degree, if you don't have that certificate in your hand, there are no jobs. We know there are no jobs, and the situation is even worse now. But they will be made to go and pay for open learning. The only thing is, now we are being told that open learning and digital education is actually very good. It's very good. It's very exciting. See what is happening. Now when the pandemic is on, schools are closed. But see, children and schools which are providing online education, their students are learning. So don't worry. If you have to study open learning, don't worry. You will be able to do it. But is the government going to help? Is the government going to help? Is the government going to intervene in this? This government which is telling us today that 40% of all your learning, even if you get into a school or a college or a university, is going to be online. Is the government going to help the students to get online? What is the situation today? Let me just give you some stark and horrific figures taken from the government on what is the state of online learning and online access in India today. Only 8% of households, 8% of households which have one member aged between 5 and 24. Between 5 and 24 is the period when you would otherwise be studying. Okay? Only 8% of them have access either to a digital device or to internet services. 37% of households are single room households. Single room, which means you can hardly have your children who are studying from school, college, and university, suppose you can hardly have them having access to online learning or to being able to take online classes. The other thing is, when we say 8%, we don't mean that they own this. We mean that they have access to it. The access may be in a cyber cafe, maybe in a local market, maybe in school, maybe in a neighbor's house. So that tells you that this access is very shaky at the moment. I only want to give you one little data which I read in the Times of India when there was this talk about online examinations being held in Delhi University for students. This was a survey done in Lady Sri Ram College. Lady Sri Ram College is one of the most elite colleges of Delhi University. And the survey showed that 68% of students from Lady Sri Ram College would be unable to do an exam which was done online. Now, I think this pandemic actually has exposed for us completely the unequal and horrific nature of inequality that exists in our societies. It's not just those millions of people who had to walk. Now, an Oxfam survey and study has said that 6 million children out of the age group of school education are not in schools. They are not in schools, but now the government is telling them, see, don't worry about getting into a school. Do online learning. In a little while, don't worry, even your primary education will be done online if that can't be handled by the Amazons. So is the government then, suppose let us assume that they've convinced everybody that online learning is very good. It is very good to have a modular unit of learning. You simply cope with that, and you'll be tested only on that, and your teachers will teach you only that, and then so it will be very good. You'll get your degree at the end of it. Suppose we say that this is going to be done. Is the government going to be giving, after all, even if you want to do a modular, meaningless education online, even if you're going to have uniformity in this lack of quality online and in open learning, is the government going to contribute anything? After all, children will have to pay for internet connectivity. Children will have to pay for getting devices. Will something like this be done? There's another shocking little statement that I would like to show you. In the year 2019 to 2020, the government had given 604 crores. 604 crores was their budget for assistance to move to digital learning and open learning. In the year 2021 budget, that figure has been reduced from 604 to 469 crores. So clearly, the government is not going to be contributing anything for students to study and learn. The government is not going to be contributing to the expenses of online learning. That is why they are so happily introducing online learning, because it is you who will have to pay for it. The student, the family that is not able to manage formal education will now have to pay for online learning. The government will do nothing. At most, if the government wants to keep some corporates happy, they will give some laptops to schools, they'll give some tablets to schools, and that might be it. Otherwise, they are not going to be contributing. As they said, we are going to implement this policy only where it costs us nothing. So where the costs are nothing, open learning, higher education, poor quality of distance learning, uniformity of distance learning, that you pay for once you have exited your school at the age of 10 or less than 10, at the age of 12, at the age of 14, at the age, and so on. So you will keep exiting. As much as your parents can manage, you'll pay for. But after that, if you can't, you'll exit. You'll either go into child labor, for which, by the way, the government has already changed the law. You can now enter at the age of 10, you can go into family-based labor. And the work which is now said to be not good for children or hazardous for children, now it has only been reduced to 3 categories of work which are hazardous for children under 14. Otherwise, they can please go to work. So you can go to work, and while you go to work, you get your education online by paying to these companies, and you get your certificate at the end of it. But forget about a new education policy. This is a new exclusion policy, which is so shameless in its exclusion that it does not even bother to hide its terrible face. The government is going to make no contribution. You are going to have to pay for your own education. That is the lesson that is being taught by the new education policy. And do not believe, please do not believe that digital online education can replace classroom education. Everybody knows, every educationist knows that there is no solution. There is no way in which digital education can replace classroom education. It can only help in a formal system of education. It cannot replace a formal system of education. But our government, by this so-called policy, is going to replace formal education for 85 to 90% of the children of this country. It's going to replace it for them with online digital education, for which they will have to pay themselves, possibly by engaging in child labor. Thank you.
Thank you so much, ma'am, for enlightening talk. Now we have Ms. Nisha. She is teaching in Shyama Prasad Mukherjee College, University of Delhi, also pursuing PhD from Central Institute of Education, Delhi University. So she will speak the speak on inclusiveness and NEP. So we are inviting Nisha to speak on the topic.
Thank you so much. Audible? Sumit ji, am I audible? Please say yes. Sumit ji, am I audible?
Yes, yes, you are audible.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you. Thank you. So I think after so much of discussion on the NEP, I'm feeling that, I was just thinking about those people who are still admiring, or who are the admirers of the policy. So we have Professor Poonam Batra, we had Professor Madhu, Prasad, who had elaborately talked about what the policy is all about. And but contradictorily, I think we have to understand that we still have the admirers, which is quite large in number. So there is something in policy. We have to understand that even the so-called who are into the field of education are also getting swayed away with those sugar-coated terms. So I think there is, we have to give some credit to the policymakers, because they have been using such words that if you read it in a flow, you will find that yes, the policy is talking about on online education. It's talking about quality. It's talking about inclusion. It's talking about what is it that they have left. But after listening to the deliberation, that we had from our professors, I would like to thank all of them, and because I have already got the message from Sumit ji to be very brief. So I would try not to repeat, but I would try to just pick from where Professor Madhu Prasad had left us. So when she was talking of this, the era of 1813, or the British era, when we were actually talking of numeracy and literacy in those era, with the objective of having the disciples who can work for the British Raj. So similarly, I will not go much ahead, but just talking about the vision of the policy. So a policy which has come after 35 years, and the vision which is completed in, I think, 10 lines. So in those 10 lines also, I think the task is really to understand what are the basic assumptions behind the statements or the terms or the ideology or the these vocabulary which is being utilized into the policy. So just speaking from that clue which professor gave us. So it also is very similar when we say that the vision of the policy says that students need to develop a deep sense of respect towards the fundamental duties. Now, quickly talking about fundamental duties, the moment we talk about the duties, the discourse of citizenship does come into existence, because it has resemblance to the discourse of citizenship, where where we talked of this colonial civics. So those people who are into the field of social sciences will be able to understand that this civics, the subject civics in itself, which had a colonial legacy, came into the existence or became the part of Indian education system in that era when there was increasing disloyalty among the citizens, and we wanted loyal citizens who would respect the fundamental duties and who would respect the nation and the values of the country. So similarly, we see that the discourse is again back here. So the policy, we will see enough of data sharing. So I will not go into data, but just understanding the basic assumption which tells us that the discourse of fundamental rights is completely missing in the policy. So we have already been discussing that this is an exclusionary policy to such a great extent that the policy doesn't even hide talking about what they're saying. So this is alarming for us. For all of us to understand that a policy, so-called a national education policy, comes into existence, and it does not even use the term fundamental rights for even once in the whole policy, right? So they are using, in fact, they are using the word basic rights, but they are not talking about the basic, but the fundamental rights. Now, somebody may ask me, Nisha, do you think, along with using the term fundamental duties, if we just say that children should be enabled to, know about their fundamental duties and fundamental rights, so do you think it will change the discourse? So the question is no, it will not change. So जहाँ पे इतनी terms हैं, वहाँ पे एक अगर term और आ जाती है, तो वो discourse को नहीं बदल देगा. But then the question is that what is it that is stopping them to use the word fundamental rights? Why the policy is not talking about the fundamental rights? You are, so the whole discourse of rights, if it is missing in the education policy, that's alarming, quite alarming for us. So, one thing that I want to argue here, that as a practitioner, as a teacher myself, so, when we are practicing, so, we do feel that, what is next for us, for the teachers to work upon. So the policy actually doesn't give us the path, the next way ahead. कि next way ahead क्या होगा? So अभी जब हम fundamental rights की, या हम already एक epistemological frame की, for example, the position paper talks of the epistemological frame. It proposes epistemological frame which talks about change in nomenclature. कि हम civics की बात नहीं करेंगे, हम एक नया discourse की बात कर रहे हैं जहाँ पे हम individuals को, citizens को एक ऐसी situation में देखते हैं जहाँ पे we can build that capacity of discerning. जहाँ पे सोशल साइंसेज जो कि तर्क और वितर्क दोनों करने की क्षमताएं बिल्ड करता है. सो हमारे पास अभी ऐसी टेक्स्ट बुक्स थी जो कि फॉर एग्जांपल इन क्लास 6 वी वर टॉकिंग ऑफ क्लास 6 स्टाइल वाज टॉकिंग ऑफ व्हेन ही वाज टॉकिंग ऑफ डेमोक्रेसी, ही वाज टॉकिंग ऑफ पार्टिसिपेशन, ही वाज टॉकिंग ऑफ कॉन्फ्लिक्ट रेजोल्यूशन, ही वाज टॉकिंग ऑफ सोशल जस्टिस. तो हम क्लास 6 में इन तरह के टर्म्स ऑलरेडी लाने की कोशिश कर चुके थे इन द क्लासरूम. एंड नाउ सडनली वी रियलाइज दैट there is, what is the way ahead now? What are we supposed to do next when we do not even have a fundamental rights as a term in the policy? So I think फर्क पड़ता है जब क्लास 8 की पहले पन्ने पर fundamental rights of children आते हैं तो बच्चे awareness build करते हैं. They do bring that conflict, they do bring that questioning, they do bring that conflicts in the classroom. So I think when we were enabling or when we were trying to bring that discourse of rights, the policy completely seems to be missing about what is the way ahead. So for example, yes, so we have to talk that in one hand when we are talking of these textbooks, on the other hand we need to talk that suddenly on the name of reducing the syllabus, we have already deleted, for example, we have deleted the chapters from class 11 political science textbooks, complete deletion of the chapters on federalism, on citizenship, on nationalism, on secularism, on the name of reducing the syllabus in the academic year of 2021. So now we have to understand that is it only the textbooks, or is it only we are trying to delete the discourse of citizenship, of nationalism, of secularism, or we have to understand that even the policy in itself is also deleting these discourses and not is very willing to bring these discourses into the forum, into the practice. So so therefore we can see that what is the vision. हम आने वाले इंडिविजुअल्स, आने वाले लर्नर्स, आने वाले टीचर्स से क्या विजन शेयर कर रहे हैं, क्या विजन उनको देना चाह रहे हैं. सो व्हेन आई वुड लाइक टू कोट दिस एग्जांपल दैट ऑन नेशनल टीवी, सो somebody when talked of the shrink in the GDP, he was told on phrase that talking about GDP is a waste of time, don't waste a nation's time. So now we have already into that era jahan pe I think talking about the GDP becomes wastage of time. So when it is the biggest contraction in record, which is minus 20, I think it's 23.9 or something, but then talking about the GDP so suddenly is just a waste of time. So at the same time, I think I'm using the not the right term. It's not suddenly. कोई भी चीज अचानक से नहीं होती है. There is always measures for the same. So ये जो exclude बोल रहा है इसकी preparation भी इन से already on that for example I would like to say कि जब हम discourse of फंडामेंटल राइट्स की बात कर रहे हैं तो जो ऑनेस्ट एफर्ट्स भी थे, जो पुराने एफर्ट्स भी थे जो किए गए थे, फॉर एग्जांपल वी सिंपली टॉक ऑफ आरटी व्हिच प्रोफेसर बत्रा हैज आल्सो टॉक्ड अबाउट दैट राइट टू एजुकेशन, द मैंडेट दैट इट केम making education as a fundamental right. The policy doesn't talk about the RTE. It doesn't talk about how do we need to build further on RTE, on making the education as a fundamental right, which clearly indicates that yes, we are not, at least till now we should be in a position to understand that the policy or the policy makers are not in the in the frame of building those which has already been done to make it further. So instead of that, let's talk about the common school system. The policy, the Kothari Commission in 64, 66, or even the same thing was talked about, was discussed in the next policies in 68 and 86. But at the same time, we have to, this is again alarming that, एक education को fundamental right बनाने की तरफ जो भी progression हुआ था या जो भी provisions की बात हुई थी, the policy seems to be completely missing. It doesn't even talk of, the common school system. So I think in history of India, this is the first policy which doesn't even talk of bringing more schools. It doesn't talk of bringing more schools into the field. So rather it talks of global citizen education. So वो global citizen बनाने की तो बात कर रहा है, but then in fact they are also talking of global citizenship education. So you will be educated to become a global citizen. Now what is this global citizenship? It is important for the individuals to know about the global issues. Yes, of course it is important. We should know about the climate change, we should know about the environment, we should know about the biological diversity, but what about the diversity that that is there in our country. So they do use the term local context, but what is the significance of that local context? Where are you bringing the knowledge or the subjectivity which is coming out of that local knowledge? There is no recognition of the same. Yeah. So actually, in our classrooms when we talk of say diversity and differences, तो I think मुझे तो लग रहा है कि diversity के जो असली मायने हैं शायद पॉलिसी में वही completely बहुत दूर दूर तक नहीं है, क्योंकि जब हम differences और diversity की बात करते हैं, I think I often share this in my classroom, so children do come up with this analogy that differences is we do see differences, but diversity is not only restricted to recognition of those differences. We do have differences, but diversity incorporates recognition of those differences, at the same time celebration of those differences, or say accepting those differences. Yeah, it is important, but where do we talk of celebration or of recognition? No, we do not. So coming back to my topic, which says that how does the unfortunate, actually I'm calling it unfortunate because I find it unfortunate, because these are unfortunate ways of ensuring inclusion. So ensuring inclusion भी completely, as you have already discussed, are missing. So जहाँ पे हम डाइवर्सिटी की बात कर रहे हैं, जहाँ हम सेलिब्रेशन की और एक्सेप्टेंस की डिफरेंसेस को एक्सेप्ट करने की, उनको सेलिब्रेट करने की बात कर रहे हैं, वहाँ पे द ब्रैकेटिंग ऑफ एज प्रोफेसर बत्रा also has shared that bracketing the 80% population of your country into one bracket, which is also being argued that it is unconstitutional, because आप constitutional categories को नहीं इस्तेमाल कर रहे हो, आपने 80% population को एक ब्रैकेट में डाल दिया, and the bracket is socio-economically disadvantaged groups. Now this groups I think आपने सिर्फ 80% पॉपुलेशन को ही नहीं इस ग्रुप में डाला है, आपने उनके कंसर्न्स को, उनके नॉलेज को, उनकी सब्जेक्टिविटी को, उनके प्रॉब्लम्स को, उनकी दिक्कतों को, आई थिंक उनके जो उनकी प्रॉब्लम्स हैं या जो उनकी से जो उनके पास रिस्ट्रिक्शंस हैं, उन सबको आपने एक ब्रैकेट में डाल दिया. नाउ फॉर इंस्टेंस if I just talk of that, who all are included in these SAD GS groups, so everybody. So you think of males, females, transgender individuals, SCs, STs, OBCs, minorities, student from village, student from small towns, student with disabilities or the learning disabilities, or the socio-economic conditions such as the migrants, the low economic groups, the victims or the children of victims of trafficking, orphans, child beggars. You have just bracketed the whole concerns of the country into one bracket, and you want to shun away with that responsibility. So now we have already discussed that the state is not in mood to take the responsibility of ensuring inclusion. Inclusion is a far away, but then even ensuring that children are able to come or being a part or become a part of the education system. So on that also it becomes very interesting कि जो admirers हैं इस policy के, शायद वो लोग भी in terms से swayed away हो जाने की क्षमता रख रहे हैं. I don't know कैसे वो swayed away हो जा रहे हैं, but then the policy straight away says that SEDG जो हमारे socio economically disadvantaged group से जो लोग आते हैं और जिन areas में इनकी population ज्यादा है, हम उनमें special education zones की बात कर रहे हैं. So similar to the economic zone that we have talked of, कि वहाँ पे state liberties और या state जो regulations होंगे वो थोड़ी will be it will be easier. So similarly in that zones we are saying that उन areas में हम लोग इन zones को लेकर आएंगे. अब SEDGS के जो लोग हैं उनको आप बार बार उनके लिए एक प्रोविजन खड़ा कर रहे हैं कि देखो, और वो प्रोविजन क्या है, वो नाम का प्रोविजन है. वो या तो ये है कि भाई आप तो ऑनलाइन एजुकेशन आ जाओ, जो प्रोफेसर मधु प्रसाद ने ऑलरेडी बोल दिया कि जो कि आपके अपने कॉस्ट पर आएगा, तो सरकार खुद तो कुछ भी करने के लिए तैयार नहीं है. ओके, बट इट इज सेइंग दैट इट इज अप टू यू हाउ you want to be part of the education policy. So just quickly talking about the higher education as well. So I think when it is talking of holistic and multidisciplinary education in the context of higher education, you will find the term like multidisciplinary repeatedly in one page, or the whole section is full of the term multidisciplinary. So I think एक पेज में आपको 6 या 7 बार इस टर्म का repetition दिख जाएगा, बट आप यकीन मानिए जब आप कोशिश करेंगे कि आप समझने की कोशिश करें कि एक्चुअली multidisciplinary है क्या, तो I think the policy fails to talk about that कि actually multidisciplinary institutions होंगे क्या. Yeah, so in context of higher education जिसकी वो बात कर रहे हैं, which seems to be very interesting terms or very fancy terms. So they are using the word that they will have the choice based credit system. They will have an academic bank of credit. Now this ABC, the academic bank of credit, says that आप जो भी recognized higher institutes हैं higher education के, so with this credit system, with these credits in hand, you can shift from one institution to the other institution. So one of the people I heard that they were saying that, see, such a great policy because it gives you the provision to make exit. So अगर आप किसी कारणवश exit कर जाते हैं education policies या higher education से, so see they have certificates to offer you. So अगर आप 1 साल के बाद किसी कारणवश निकल जाते हैं तो आपको सर्टिफिकेट दे दिया जाएगा. अगर आप 2 साल के तक सस्टेन कर पाते हैं तो हम आपको डिप्लोमा भी दे देंगे. अगर आप 3 साल तक सस्टेन कर पाते हैं तो हम आपको डिग्री भी दे देंगे. बट आई थिंक masla, it somehow reminds me of diploma disease. So is it about the diploma disease, or we wanted to understand कि education में तो मुद्दा जो मसला था वो तो sustenance का था. It's not only about enrollment, but we understand that children are not able to sustain into the education system. There are hundreds of reasons because of which the push out or the dropouts had take place. So actually with this exit points and with this entry points, you are actually legitimizing their problems to exit. So this is like saying that we have the exit point. अगर आप नहीं कर पा रहे हैं तो well and good, you can go. So you just take the certificate and you can go. But the issue coming back to the sustenance of being able to sustain. So वो sustain की तो बात कर ही नहीं रहा है. वो बोल रहा है कि आपको जब जाना है, आपको class 3 के बाद जाना है, you may go. आपको class 5 के बाद जाना है, आप जा सकते हैं. So is it a policy which is talking of inputs, or is it a policy which is talking of mechanisms to ensure inclusion, or it is a policy which is ensuring the exclusion? तो हमें समझने की जरूरत है कि actually it is not only the unfortunate ways with which they are actually including, or they are talking of inclusion, but actually when we are saying that state is saying that we will not take the responsibility of of funding or of giving money or into the education system, but actually I would say that state अपनी responsibility निभा रहा है in terms of making the segregation more clearer. वो कह रहा है कि वो जो 6% लोग हैं जो कि somehow sustain करके हायर एजुकेशन तक पहुंच जाते हैं, उनको भी कैसे एग्जिट करना है, क्योंकि ये सिस्टम क्या है ना कि अभी बहुत सेग्रीगेटेड दिख नहीं रहा है. So they, I think, are performing the responsibility of making the education segregated in such clear terms that we have a clear distinction between the class of the class of haves and the mass of have-nots. Yeah, so I think it is actually working on this task to make that segregation more clearer, कि इसको और clear कर दो कि जो आ भी पा रहे हैं उनको भी हम लोग कैसे exit points की बात करके निकालने की rather बात कर रहे हैं. So I think as Professor Madhu Prasad had already shared that they are not hiding anything. So I think that is the best part of the policy, that it is stating everything. It has written, it is documented in the policy. So I think this is the first policy in Indian history which is talking of exit points. Yeah, so I think Sumit is just about to tell me that I have to close the discussion. So, in the end, I just want to say that we have of JP Nayak book Quality and Quantity, the elusive triangle in Indian education. So वो जो I think analysis था उसकी जो I think that is a very high expectation, but then that actually showed us a way कि हम इन तीनों pillars को कैसे इकट्ठा करके एक education policy में एक comprehensive policy हम लोग ला सकते थे. But then this policy is actually I think after this discussion I would say that this is not a policy of education, this is actually a policy of exclusion. So coming back to I would like to conclude the whole discussion by saying that yes, it is high time that we get back to Dr. Ambedkar's words when he was strategizing, or when he gave us the strategy of educate, agitate, and organize. So actually, educate is the in the series also we have to understand that education is the first step in the series. So you will get educating system. So I think system में बने रहना बहुत जरूरी है. और यहाँ पर बकायदा पूरा mechanism है, provision है कि आपको system से बाहर कैसे निकाला जाए. So I think the very first step which Ambedkar Sahib has also talked about, that before the process of organizing or for a common mission or for getting that education or getting those conflicts or questions, we need to educate. So I think सिस्टम को समझने के लिए, सिस्टम से लड़ने के लिए आई थिंक सिस्टम में बने रहना बहुत जरूरी है. एंड दैट्स व्हाट द गवर्नमेंट इज वर्किंग फॉर. आई थिंक दे आर जस्ट रिगरसली वर्किंग ऑन दैट, हाउ जो सिस्टम में बने हुए भी हैं उनको कैसे निकाला जाए. सो आई थिंक I would say that it's unfortunate, and being a practitioner, it's painful to read the policy, and while using the term unfortunate ways of ensuring inclusion in education. So actually, I would say that it's painful to read the policy. It's disheartening to read the policy. It is, it is. What do I say? So I think, but at the same time, it gives us the power, the encouragement, the ability to question more and to bring into the platform, and with these discussions like this. So thanks to SFI, thanks to Sumitji for inviting me, and for such the discussions. This such the pointers that were discussed, I think it's enlightening. So Sumitji, I hope I have not exceeded the time that you gave me. So I think I would like to stop here, and I'm really, really thankful for considering me words to share my experiences or my words. Thank you, Sumitji.
Thank you so much, Nisha. Now, briefly, we will take a round of 2 minutes, 1 minute or 2 minutes. Just say, what do you think about the national education policy? कि national education policy को अगर आप समाप्त करें 1 मिनट या 2 मिनट में, तो वो actually है क्या? So, I'll invite first Professor Poonam Batra to speak. Only 2 minutes.
Okay, so I will basically say that the NEP 2020 is a threat to the constitutional agenda of equitable quality public education. It uses the term constitutional values to be taught, but it does not use the constitutional frame to frame the policy. And it's against it because it disregards the constitutional categories mandated by the Constitution, such as SC, ST, OBC, by mixing up these with other kind of categories, and by disregarding the RTE, which is a central legislation, and by rearranging curricular and pedagogic processes. It also disregards the constitutional category of elementary education. And it gives us a veneer of choice and many exit points, which are actually push-outs, as has been said. And I think it is exercising very clearly a very greater control, not only of regulation, funding, accreditation, but of curriculum. So in the bid to homogenize and standardized curricula and pedagogic processes and assessment. And I think this takes us towards their ideological agenda of homogenizing identities. And this is going to happen through apex bodies. And lastly, I'd like to say that we have seen over the past months and years how there have been deletions of curriculum which are specifically about those very constitutional frames and values that this policy is disregarding. But there's been an addition to curriculum, which few people are talking about, which is actually bringing myth back in the place of history, which is what we tried to fight in the year 2000, and the Supreme Court helped us to fight that. But today we've got most of these institutional frames also not quite available to listen to our pleas. Finally, the policy is a perfect formula to create a center-state conflict and undermine the federal structure within which we operate as a country. Because by vesting greater powers in the political executive and in the apex national level bodies, it is disregarding this fact that education is essentially a state subject, that it may be concurrent, but its major autonomy lies with the state. And there's sure to be a conflict between the center and the state. And I think we can see that already happening, even in terms of GST and other such news that we get in the everyday papers. And the states seem to be helpless in terms of sort of demanding the dues that are due to them. And the education system, like the health system, is largely a state subject. And we see a great threat to our constitutional frame itself.
Thank you so much, ma'am. Dr. Vikas Gupta, we invite you to speak 2 minutes. What do you think about the national education policy? Sum up in 1 or 2 minutes.
Well, I think there is, of course, no doubt about the fact that a lot of things in higher education are based on particular acts duly passed by the parliament. And until those acts are amended or replaced legally, in that sense, this policy may not have an effect. However, on practical grounds, this reveals the way government is going to move on, or rather has already started moving on. And therefore, there is a lot for a student organization like the SFI to actually take note of, and to start think how do we build a program, of breaking a lot of myths about the goods that this policy is going to do, and prepare ourselves to contest the things that it is going to push for, because the way it is going to restructure higher education is very much clear. And even though many things may require enactment, uh, many of these things that we have been talking about will be pushed even if it does not go to the Parliament of India. Therefore, the whole point about centralization that Professor Batra made just before me is going to also, for example, limit the choice of students for research through NRF, and other bodies, which I'm not detailing now. So in that way, in the way it is going to restructure the year-wise pattern, in the way it is going to bring in more universities, in the way it is going to open it more and more for market, deregulated market, those are things that, will happen. And if we are not able to contest it effectively, it will confirm the already established, or rather secured sense that, okay, there is an acceptance to the broad contours of this policy. I think the greatest challenge before us today is to somehow ensure that this clever maneuvering tactics, wherein the policy was first, no, the salient features in the form of statement were given to the media, and then opinions were invited. Uh, with this, the kind of process that has begun, and the way in which our even political groups have not realized perhaps the immediate danger that it creates. I think that needs to be really contested. We need to think of a day when they can even bring it into the parliament, and on a short notice. That is how it has, we were alerted, I think, last year also in the winter session, although it did not come, but that danger is still very much there. And the last thing I want to say is that the fact that even the question answer session is being abolished in the parliament is going to make it even more difficult for all of us to see, that we can, even when it does not come to the parliament and still puts into implementation, it is put into implementation, how do we raise questions about it? That is going to be another challenge for us. So I'm deliberately listing, some of these issues because, this is primarily, the audience of, the SFI. So I think these things do matter. It's all about, how do you contest it? It's not simply about, understanding the problem, which we all have spoken about, but how do you take it up? I think there's going to be a big issue. That should be a big issue, I think, for the organization. That's it. Thank you.
जैसे आपने बोला कि पार्लियामेंट में इस पे कोई क्वेश्चन आंसर कुछ नहीं हुआ, लेकिन हमने क्वेश्चन आंसर सेशन रखा है। जो हमारे पास क्वेश्चंस आए हैं फेसबुक पे, वी विल टेक आफ्टर द टॉक, बट अभी 8:24 हो गया है, सो वी विल टेक सम रेलिवेंट एंड जेन्युइन क्वेश्चंस, 1 or 2 questions, so we will want reply in brief also. So Advocate Soka Agarwal, speak on 2 minutes.
मेरी समझ में ये है कि ये जो इस पॉलिसी में जो कॉर्पोरेट को फायदा कराने वाली चीजें ना, वो तो सब इम्प्लीमेंट हो जाएंगी, लेकिन जो ये बातें कर रहे हैं कि हम स्कूल बनाएंगे, टीचर्स लाएंगे, ये करेंगे, वो करेंगे, जो कुछ सो कॉल्ड अच्छी अच्छी बातें हैं, वो कुछ इम्प्लीमेंट नहीं होनी। वो तो ये होगा कि जो मार्जिनलाइज्ड बच्चे हैं वो फर्दर मार्जिनलाइज्ड होंगे हैं। और ये जो डिजिटल एजुकेशन और ये ओपन स्कूल को एनकरेज कर रहे हैं, इवन डिसेबल्ड बच्चों को कह रहे हैं कि आप ओपन स्कूल में चले जाइए, जो बच्चे स्कूल नहीं जा सकते वो चले जाइए, है। अभी पेंडेमिक के अंदर जो है चाइल्ड लेबर बढ़ने के पूरे चांसेस हैं, गवर्नमेंट स्कूल से ड्रॉप आउट सिस्टम है, उसको कहीं ये एड्रेस करना नहीं चाहते हैं। तो ये मतलब ये एक तरीके से मजाक है लोगों के साथ, और ये मेजॉरिटी ऑफ जो चिल्ड्रन है वो उनको फायदा नहीं होने वाला इससे, और नुकसान होने वाला है, यही मेरा कहना है।
सर, प्रोफेसर मधु प्रसाद। Just open your mic. Yes, yes. We are not getting your voice.
Now?
Yeah, fine.
Okay. I'm saying the first thing is that this policy is not a vision for education, because if a vision for education will require a commitment to principles of equality and non-discrimination, and there is no such thing in the policy making. The center and states should come together for this. I mean, if we could see that there's no vision in this policy by the very way in which it has been put together over the last 6-7 years. There is no public debate. There is no national discussion on this issue. There is no discussion with the teachers or the students or the academic community. No discussion with parents. No discussion with school teachers. What are they facing? What are their problems? So to continue democratic participation of all the involved sections, this would have helped you to create a vision. So in this policy, I do not see any vision for the revival or the development of education. But that does not mean, and I'm very sharp on this, that does not mean that this is a policy without an agenda. This is a policy which has no vision, but it has a very definite agenda. And its agenda is on two sides. It has two aspects of its agenda. One is that it is, as Ashok also just said now, whatever the corporates want will be done. Their interests will be fully taken care of, because that doesn't cost the government, cost in inverted commas, it does not cost the government anything. The government is not, they're only required to hand over the education system, which they're very happy to hand over to the corporate sector. But there is another aspect of it which is very important, and which you can see very clearly in their strategy for online learning and their introduction of volunteers and a variety of informal actors into the actual education system. And in terms of online learning, they have developed a portal called Vidya Dan. If anybody doesn't understand where this expression has come from, because we all think of education as a right. We all think of education as a process of developing your critical abilities, of exercising your rights, of recognizing the errors in society, of doing things which will change the weaknesses in your society. But when you talk of Vidya Dan, then suddenly your antenna stands up. This is a completely, there's an organization of cadres which has this conception of knowledge as being a daan or a charity, which is given to you by somebody and you have no right to question it. Now, with this kind of approach to knowledge, then you are not going to encourage at all, you are going to encourage conformism, not any kind of attempt of changes or radical progressive ideas, and even of critical thinking. Because when something is given to you as daan, आप उसको स्वीकार करते हैं, आप उसको ठुकराते नहीं हैं, आप ये नहीं कहते कि ये आपका दान हमें पसंद नहीं, ये अच्छा नहीं है, ये ठीक नहीं है, आप उसको स्वीकार करते हैं और उसको हजम करके आप उसको आगे औरों के पास आगे बांटते हैं. So I think that this double agenda, the corporate agenda on the one hand, and the cadre-based organization, I don't even need to mention it because all of you have recognized it, the cadre-based organization whose tasks and agendas are going to be carried forward. They said when the policy came out, 80% of of the suggestions that we gave have been accepted. And when you have volunteers and persons of eminence in the community and public spirited members of the community, when you have them entering into the field of education, then you know that there's an agenda which is going to be carried out. That's all.
Thank you so much, ma'am. So we have Nisha to speak on to me.
Yeah, so as this forum is addressing the students, so majorly the students, so therefore I would, through this platform, I would just like to say that the student is actually the real power, the young, the youngsters which are there in field who are actually accessing this education. तो हमें और तुम्हें ही समझने की जरूरत है कि ये हमारे ही फ्यूचर के बारे में बात हो रही है. So I think through this platform I would like to address most of the students who are listening, that let's not get swayed away with the terms that are being utilized, that are being mentioned in the policy, but try to get into the nuanced understanding, or just trying to get into the meanings that are between the lines, or the ideologies that are propagated through the so-called policy. Thank you.
Now we can move for some questions. After that we'll end the webinar. So there are some questions on Facebook page. So I'm asking. One second. Ramurthy asked that why the replica of I Live American University system and process of learn by earn is impractically Indian system. How does NEP 2020 relate with the rhetoric of university reform in DU 2017 to 14? So anyone, honorable speaker, can answer that.
Vikas.
Well, am I audible?
Yeah.
Yes, sir.
It's not because the US universities are investment-based universities, although they are called community colleges, but they are investment-based universities. I mean, they are no longer. So it's. I mean, the situation that is there is really is not the older welfare model. So that in no way is actually serving the interest even in the US. If you see a lot of critical writings that are available now, and there is no way that it can really serve the purpose of higher education in India. I mean, this is one of the things. So the second is that even relating to the first is that even the very philosophy, it's not simply about the fact that investment-based educational institutions are problematic because they are not affordable. That is only one part of it. But the second problem is that the investment-based universities are based on a very different understanding of the concept of education itself, where education is something which is seen as serving the individual interest, and therefore it's an individual good. It's no longer a social good, and therefore one has to purchase it by taking loans or through working in the extra hours, and then the education that you achieve, you have to repay, you have to regain that capital by getting profit out of it. So it can never be used. For example, if you spend 1 crore rupees in getting a medical degree, you cannot, or even becoming a teacher, whatever else that you can think of, then you cannot be really expected to get into a situation where the salary is not such that you can repay that loan amount that you have taken. And we know our economy, so I mean, not I mean, it's neither affordable nor it's really based on a solid philosophical foundation. And in Delhi University, after the abolition of the 4-year degree program as such, we have seen that in different ways, actually the process was on. You know, we adopted almost everything that was there in the 4-year degree program in these years. You know, since 2014-15, we adopted the credit system. We changed our syllabus. We had already entered into the semester mode. You know, there is a lot, you know. So now I think what has happened is that they took this back at that point of time, partly to gain political advantage, and also I think they realized that, you know, we have to push it in a systematic manner. So they did it over these years, and now they are properly kind of bringing it again. So in Delhi University, a lot was written at that point of time about the problems of the 4-year degree program, and all of that is still valid. And remember, in that older idea of the 4-year degree program also, this concept of multiple exits was there, right? So this is just one example. So all the reasons because of which the 4-year degree program was contested in 2014 are valid in 2020 as well, but it is being adopted in the policy now.
Okay, sir. So Manoj Kumar asked that कोठारी कमीशन द्वारा अनुशंसित और उसके बाद आई शिक्षा नीतियों ने जिस समान स्कूल व्यवस्था की वकालत की, राष्ट्रीय शिक्षा की नीति 2020 ने उसका जिक्र तक करना मुनासिब नहीं समझा। तो इस पे प्रोफेसर पूनम बत्रा आप आंसर रिप्लाई कर सकते हैं।
सबसे पहले तो ये जानना जरूरी है कि कोठारी कमीशन की जो सिफारिशें थी, जैसे कि कॉमन स्कूल सिस्टम, वो 1968 की पॉलिसी ने नहीं लिया था। ये हमें समझना है कि हमारी पहली शिक्षा नीति ने इसको एक्सेप्ट नहीं किया था, वो कोठारी कमीशन में ही रह गया था। बल्कि इसके बारे में जेपी नायक बहुत अच्छी तरीके से अपनी लास्ट किताब में लिखते हैं, बहुत ही दुखी और नाराज और निराश होकर, कि जो डिबेट्स चली थी उस वक्त कॉमन सिस्टम को, स्कूल सिस्टम को लेके, और ये कहा जा रहा था कि हम सभी बच्चों को शिक्षा दें, तो जो बहुत धनवान लोग थे, पढ़े लिखे लोग थे, प्रोफेशनल थे, उन्होंने जोर जोर से ये बात कही थी कि पहले हम अपने बच्चों को तो पढ़ा लें, वो तो पढ़ना भी नहीं चाहते। तो हमें समझना है कि ये मानसिकता अब नहीं आई है, यह हमारी सोसाइटी में हमारे बहुत सारे अपर कास्ट अपर क्लास लोगों में ये मानसिकता अभी भी वाजिब है, और इसी कारण से ये ट्रैजेक्टरी बनी है पॉलिसी की कि हम आज 2020 की पॉलिसी में ये बातें कह रहे हैं। ये पहली बार नहीं हो रही बात, पर बहुत पुराना पॉलिसी ट्रैजेक्टरी हमें यहाँ आके उन्होंने खड़ा किया है, और हम धीरे धीरे चीजों को एक्सेप्ट करते रहे हैं, और ये बात हमको समझना जरूरी है। जैसे कि एक फ्रॉग की बात करते हैं ना, कि अगर गर्म पानी में एक मेंढक को डाला जाए तो वो तो एकदम उछल के बाहर आ जाएगा, लेकिन जब उसका पानी धीरे धीरे गर्म करेंगे तो उसे पता भी नहीं चलेगा कि कब वो मर जाएगा।
So Sanya Nagpal also commented that state अपनी responsibility निभा रहा है in terms of making the segregation of class clearer. So I also want to ask Professor Madhu Prasad regarding the class, caste and gender things in NEP.
NEP में तो ये तो साफ है कि आपने हर तरह के हमारे समाज में, हम ये हर वक्त कहते हैं हमारे समाज में जो भी कुछ होता है ना वो 3000 साल से होता आ रहा है। तो हमारे समाज में बहुत सिस्टमिक ऑपरेशन है, कास्ट ऑपरेशन, tribal oppression of tribal regions, oppression of women. These are systemic forms of repression. You cannot say that caste system and patriarchy is something that can be handled by individual solutions. इसमें आपने क्या किया है, सबको जोड़ दिया है in the socially disadvantaged economic groups, वो सबको उसमें जोड़ दिया है। कम्युनलिज्म भी एक हमारा बहुत जरूरी एक बहुत बड़ा सिस्टमिक ऑपरेशन है। इन सब चीजों को अगर आपकी पॉलिसी स्वीकृति नहीं करेगी, अगर इसके बारे में आप सोचने को ही नहीं तैयार, आप देखेंगे इस पॉलिसी के जो पन्ने हमारे पास आए हैं, मुझे पता नहीं ये पॉलिसी है या नहीं, बट कुछ पन्ने हमारे सामने आए हैं जो कहा गया है कि कैबिनेट ने इसको पास कर दिया है। इन सब में ना तो मुझे कास्ट शब्द दिखाई दिया, ना मुझे शब्द कम्युनलिज्म दिखाई दिया, ना मुझे शब्द पैट्रियार्की दिखाई दी। तो आप किस दुनिया में बात कर रहे हैं? किसको आप फिर आप कह रहे हैं हम यूनिफॉर्मिटी ऑफ क्वालिटी एजुकेशन दे रहे हैं? आप ना क्वालिटी ना यूनिफॉर्मिटी का तो सवाल ही नहीं, क्योंकि यूनिफॉर्मिटी तो क्वालिटी में की बात ही नहीं है। यूनिफॉर्मिटी इज नॉट नेसेसरी इन क्वालिटी, बट आप तो क्वालिटी देना ही नहीं चाह रहे। आप तो इनइक्वालिटी को छुपा के उसके ऊपर एक सेंट्रलाइज स्कीम पेश कर रहे हैं, जिसमें आप ये कह रहे हैं कि क्योंकि हमारा एंट्रेंस एग्जाम, क्योंकि हमारा क्वालिफाइंग एग्जाम, क्योंकि हमारा पासिंग आउट एग्जाम सेंट्रलाइज्ड है, ये लेवल प्लेइंग फील्ड है। एक ही लेवल प्लेइंग फील्ड में जो प्रिविलेज्ड है वो भी खेल रहा है, जो सेंचुरीज से डिस्क्रिमिनेटेड अगेंस्ट वो भी खेल रहा है, जो औरतें हैं वो भी खेल रही हैं, जो डिसेबल्ड हैं वो भी खेल रहे हैं। आप कह रहे हैं क्योंकि एक ही फील्ड में खेल रहे हैं ना, तो ये तो लेवल प्लेइंग फील्ड हो गई। सॉरी, ये लेवल प्लेइंग फील्ड नहीं है। आप एक तमाशा बना रहे हैं जिसमें आप जो प्रिविलेज क्लास है और जो डिस्क्रिमिनेटेड अगेंस्ट, सिर्फ डिस्क्रिमिनेटेड अगेंस्ट पर्सनली नहीं है, आप दलित को पर्सनली नहीं पिछाड़ते, आप औरत को पर्सनली नहीं ओप्रेस करते, ये सिस्टमिक ऑपरेशंस हैं। तो आप कैसे कह रहे हैं कि जो प्रिविलेज क्लास है और जो सिस्टमिकली डिप्राइव्ड है उनको आप एक ही मैदान में ले आए हो? आप एक ही मैदान में ले आओगे तो ये बहुत अच्छा हो जाएगा, ये तो अब लेवल प्लेइंग फील्ड हो गया। अब आप तो फिर आप कहोगे कि देखो आप में मेरिट नहीं था इसलिए आप आगे नहीं आ पाए, जिसमें मेरिट था वो आगे आप आ गया। बट मैं ये दूसरा कहना चाहती हूँ, और मैं ये कहना चाहती हूँ कि हमें एजुकेशन सिस्टम में भी और हमारे समाज में हमें ये मानना पड़ेगा कि हमारे समाज में मेरिट का जो विचार ही है उसमें सिस्टमिक जो डिस्क्रिमिनेशन है उसको एक हिस्सा होना है। हमें वेटेज देना है उस बंदे को जो हमें रिजर्वेशन देनी है। बी.आर. अम्बेडकर ने बिल्कुल सही कहा था जब उन्होंने बोला कि जो सेंचुरीज के लिए डिस्क्रिमिनेटेड अगेंस्ट हैं, अगर उनके लिए आपने कुछ करना है तो उनके फेवर में डिस्क्रिमिनेट करो। आप ये नहीं कह सकते हम आपको लेवल प्लेइंग फील्ड दे रहे हैं। आपको ये देखना है कि उनकी जो हालात उनकी है वो उनकी व्यक्तिगत हालात नहीं है, वो उनके व्यक्तिगत टैलेंट की वजह से नहीं, ये नहीं कि वो दिखाई नहीं दे रही। आपने उनको दबा के रखा है, आप उनको आपने धकेला है पीछे। अब आपको उनको आगे लाना है। You have to discriminate in their favor. Therefore, today in India, I will say you cannot have an Indian society or an Indian education system. And the education system is always a part of society. Let us not think that the education system is something जो आसमान से टपक के आता है, नहीं, वो भी हमारे समाज से आता है। So हमारे समाज में और हमारे एजुकेशन सिस्टम में अगर हमारे मेरिट के कॉन्सेप्ट में रिजर्वेशन और ओप्रेशन और डिस्क्रिमिनेशन के लिए कोई जगह नहीं है, तो फिर हमारा मेरिट का कॉन्सेप्ट ही बेकार है। We have to discriminate in favor of those who have been discriminated against for centuries.
Manoj Kumar also asked another question, and he is a comment, not a question. He commented that एक तरफ शिक्षा नीति 3 से 18 साल तक के बच्चों को सार्वभौमिक शिक्षा में लाने की बात कर रही है, वहीं कई ऐसे प्रावधानों से शिक्षा अधिकार कानून 2009 को खोखला बनाती नजर आती है। उदाहरण के लिए नीति नियमों को लचीला करने या स्कूल कॉम्प्लेक्स जैसे प्रावधानों को तवज्जो देती है, जहां शिक्षा अधिकार कुछ बुनियादी तत्वों जैसे पुस्तकालय, खेल का मैदान, शिक्षक छात्र अनुपात को सुनिश्चित करता है। शिक्षा नीति SEZ जैसे प्रावधानों से न सिर्फ निजी स्कूलों को इनसे छुटकारा दिलवाएगी, बल्कि पहले से ही उभरे हुए तथाकथित लो कॉस्ट निजी स्कूलों की दुकान को प्रोत्साहित करेगी. So it's related to privatization and NEP. शिक्षा नीति 2009 जो थी उसको इससे रिलेटेड. So advocate Ashok Agarwal and Nisha, first advocate Agarwal comment on it and then Nisha.
Unmute Ashok.
राइट टू एजुकेशन जो एक्ट है उसके अंदर भी जो नॉर्म्स वगैरह हैं उनको भी वो फ्लेक्सिबल करने की कोशिश कर रहे हैं.
कर दी.
हाँ, कर दी. तो मतलब सारा जो है ना वो सारा सिस्टम इस तरीके का कर रहे हैं प्रैक्टिकली. ये मुझे नहीं पता ये सही कहना होगा कि ये दे आर ट्राइंग टू रीराइट द कॉन्स्टिट्यूशन है, और उसकी जो फंडामेंटल्स जो वो है और गोल्स हैं उनको सब एक तरीके से तैश नैश कर रहे हैं. और आप देख लीजिए ना प्रैक्टिकली ऑन ग्राउंड देख लीजिए क्या हो रहा है. चाइल्ड लेबर बढ़ रहा है. चाइल्ड लेबर के लॉज भी ऐसे बना दिए हैं इन्होंने कि आप जो है अपने घर के अंदर काम कर सकते हैं. अभी ये जो पेंडेमिक है उससे कितना बच्चा हमारा जो आएगा. और राइट टू लाइफ है आर्टिकल 21 में, वो कहता है राइट टू लाइफ विद डिग्निटी. डिग्निटी कोई चैरिटी पे थोड़ी डिपेंड करती है, ये राइट के ऊपर होता है. क्या जैसे अस्पताल में कोई आदमी बीमार होता है और उसको पैसे चाहिए होते हैं तो कभी चीफ मिनिस्टर के दफ्तर में जाता था, पीएमए के दफ्तर में जाता है, मुझे दे दो मेरा बच्चा बीमार है मर जाएगा. इसी तरीके से शिक्षा भी जो है ऐसी हो गई जैसे हम भीख मांग रहे हैं क्या. तो एज ए मैटर ऑफ राइट होना चाहिए, डिग्निफाइड होना चाहिए, कॉन्स्टिट्यूशनल होना चाहिए. सारे बच्चे चाहे रिच के हों चाहे पुअर के हों सारे रेगुलर सिस्टम में जाएं, सबको अच्छी एजुकेशन मिले. किसको एजुकेशन अच्छी मिल रही है? मुझे तो लग रहा है कि जो रिच के बच्चे हैं उनको भी पता नहीं किस तरीके की एजुकेशन मिल रही है. ये भी डाउटफुल है पूरी तरीके से.
नहीं अशोक भाई डाउटफुल नहीं है वो तो आप खुल के कहिए ना. डाउटफुल कैसे है बताइए. अगर अमीर का बच्चा सिर्फ अमीरों के साथ ही बैठा है तो उसने समाज तो देखा ही नहीं.
नहीं वो ठीक है लेकिन बट हम
तो
समझते हैं कि मैं पर्सनली ये समझता हूँ कि हम कोई भी दो बच्चों को आपस में जो है ना डिस्क्रिमिनेट नहीं कर सकते. सबको इक्वल ट्रीट करेंगे, एक क्लास में ट्रीट करेंगे. इसलिए हम चाहेंगे कि सारे बच्चे रेगुलर सिस्टम में जाएं. और जो क्यूबा का सिस्टम है एजुकेशन का कि हर एक लेवल के ऊपर, हर एक लेवल एजुकेशन लेवल के ऊपर जो है बच्चों को फ्री और क्वालिटी एजुकेशन मिलनी चाहिए अप टू द एट ऑल पीपल, टू ऑल पीपल. यही होना चाहिए. जहां 80% लोग हमारे देश में गरीबी रेखा के इर्द गिर्द है, उसमें से रोज धकेले जाते हैं नीचे की तरफ. वहां पर आप इस तरीके से करेंगे कि जो पैसा होगा जिसके पास वो पढ़ेगा और जिसके पास पैसा नहीं होगा वो नहीं पढ़ेगा. मुझे लगता है ये खुद में जो है अनकॉन्स्टिट्यूशनल है. इसलिए क्लियर कट होना चाहिए, बाय लॉ होना चाहिए एट ऑल लेवल्स टू ऑल पीपल जो है एजुकेशन क्वालिटी और फ्री होनी चाहिए. यही एक मुझे लगता है ये चैलेंजिंग चीज है यहाँ की देश की जनता के लिए, और वही हमें कॉन्स्टिट्यूशनल जो गोल है उसको अचीव कर सकता है.
I think, Sumit, I would just like to add that I've already talked fundamental rights, it's completely missing in the policy. So I would just like to say that, जब हम exit points की बात कर रहे हैं तो हमें सिंपल सी बातें समझने की जरूरत है कि exit करेगा कौन. मसला ये है कि exit हम points की बना रहे हैं, but exit करेगा कौन, वही तो marginalized है अपने आप में. So I think policy being quiet about rights does make us get into this more alarming situation to think and rethink and try to understand that the policy which is existing has no vision but agenda समझने की जरूरत है. I think हर एक आयाम में agenda बहुत clearly निकल के आ भी रहा है.
So we have
अभी भी जब मैं ये वेबिनार में शामिल हूँ उस समय भी ईमेल पे बीच में चिट्ठियां देख रहा था. देख के इतना पैनिक क्रिएट हो रहा है. जिस तरह से हमारी यूनिवर्सिटी ने ये जो भी दूसरा ओपन बुक एग्जाम शेड्यूल किया है, अभी लोगों को ये नहीं पता स्टूडेंट्स को कि वो दें या ना दें. अभी उसमें इतनी सारी कॉम्प्लेक्सिटीज निकल के आ रही हैं, बहुत सारी. ये नहीं पता कि हमारी जो पहले वाली हैं वो एक्सेप्ट होंगी या नहीं होंगी, हुई या नहीं हुई, कितनी कॉपीज कहाँ चली गई. अभी इतनी अफरा तफरी मची और हम लोग इतना हेल्पलेस फील कर रहे हैं इस समय में. मतलब हमारे पास जो चिट्ठियां भेजी गई हैं एज ए डिपार्टमेंट हम कुछ कर नहीं पा रहे. मतलब एक ऐसी स्थिति में लाके हमको रख दिया गया है जहाँ पे पता नहीं सारे फैसले कहाँ से होके आ जा रहे हैं. और क्योंकि हमारा सीधा रिश्ता स्टूडेंट के साथ में होता है और आज जब वो अपने ग्रीवेंसेस लेके हमारे पास आते हैं तो हमें उनको ये कहना पड़ रहा है कि आप यूनिवर्सिटी से पूछिए, और यूनिवर्सिटी के पास उनके लिए कोई जवाब होता नहीं है। तो हमसे फिर राय मांगी जाती है, हमारे डिपार्टमेंट में राय मांगी जाती है कि टीचर से कि हम स्टूडेंट को क्या बोलें, और हम ये फैसला नहीं कर पा रहे कि हम अपने स्टूडेंट को क्या बोलें, क्योंकि हमें खुद को कुछ नहीं पता कि क्या हम उन्हें कह सकते हैं और क्या नहीं कह सकते। पर एक मॉरल डिलेमा सामने ये है कि क्यों कुछ ना कहें, क्या मतलब ये इंसानियत का सबसे बड़ी चीज है। ये तकाजा नहीं है कि जब हमारे स्टूडेंट्स परेशान हो रहे हैं, मतलब उनको ये नहीं पता कि अभी 8 तारीख, आज कितनी 6 तारीख हो गई है, और 8 तारीख तक एग्जाम दोबारा देने के लिए फॉर्म भरने हैं, और उनको ये नहीं पता कि उनको ये फॉर्म भरना है ये नहीं भरना है। ऐसे में जब वो हमसे मदद मांगने आते हैं, और मतलब ये कितनी, जैसे वो प्रोफेसर पूनम बत्रा ने किसी और संदर्भ में लिखा था 2005 में टीचर की एजेंसी के बारे में, तो मैं वही सोच रहा हूँ कि हम अपनी एजेंसी को देखिए, यूनिवर्सिटी में हमारी क्या एजेंसी है आज की तारीख में। हम अपने एक स्टूडेंट को ये बता नहीं सकते कि आपको क्या करना है और क्या नहीं करना है। उस तरह का एक अफरा तफरी का माहौल, मतलब एक पेंडेमिक सिचुएशन में जहां लोगों की नौकरियां जा रही हैं, घरों में मतलब माँ बाप के पास काम नहीं बचा है, बच्चे अपनी दूसरी परेशानी से जूझ रहे हैं। आज सबसे बड़ी प्राथमिकता हमारे सामने टेस्टिंग, इवेल्युएशन जो कि एक्सक्लूजन का एक तरीका होता है। सबसे मतलब जो बड़ा काम करता है एग्जामिनेशन, वो एक्सक्लूजन का ही करता है। वो सबसे बड़ा एजेंडा इस समय है, सबसे बड़ा एजेंडा। नए हॉस्पिटल खोलना एजेंडा नहीं है, एग्जाम लेना एजेंडा है। आई एम मतलब सॉरी, ये कहने के लिए मैं इसलिए मजबूर हूं क्योंकि अभी ये मीटिंग के दौरान ही मैं कुछ देख रहा था और इतना अपने आप को अंदर से आहत महसूस कर रहा था कि हम क्या कर सकते हैं, पता नहीं। ये हमारा एजेंडा है, बताइए। आप देखिए कितने हॉस्पिटल खुले हैं इस पेंडेमिक के दौरान है, और ये नेशनल पॉलिसी आ जाती है।
नहीं, ये जीई
मतलब आई एम स्पीकिंग लाइक अ हेल्पलेस सिटीजन ऑफ दिस कंट्री, नॉट इवन एज अ टीचर।
ये जीई का जो एग्जाम अभी इन्होंने फर्स्ट राउंड जो होल्ड किया है, 54% अटेंडेंस। दैट मींस 46% students haven't been able to sit the exam. The government is creating chaos. They are creating chaos so that they can carry out their agenda. But you're right.
Shruti MD from Ambedkar University. She is the Joint Secretary of SFI Delhi. She is pursuing PhD in English. So, Shruti. Shruti, can you hear? I think
She may have lost the connection.
he's facing some problem, I think. So, thank you so much. So, all the renowned scholar, Professor Poonam Batra, and Dr. Vikas Gupta, Professor Madhu Prasad, Advocate Ashok Agarwal, and Nisha to joining us. And it was a very good talk, and it's a very long talk also. So thank you so much for joining us. We will also invite next time, and we also do something on ground, and as we are doing, because during the pandemic we can't do many things. Whatever we can do, we are doing. But Professor Vikas Gupta said that we are organizing webinar, seminar. It is a very good thing that we should organize. We should talk. We should discuss what is the problem. So not only discussion, we should do something on ground also, because talking is not only the way to challenge the problems. We have to challenge this problems on ground also. So thank you so much to everyone. We'll also organize talk and also program on ground level also. So thank you so much.
Thank you, Suman.
Thank you.